Chapter 42-45. The situation on Reincarnation Island was extremely tense, and Yuta City was the center of attention. Patriarch Song He, who had completed his mission, didn't have time to rest. He immediately led his army and rushed to Yuta City. He didn't care about the rumors in the outside world or the discussions of the people and factions. He only knew that Lord Kenshin had stopped outside Yuta City with his army to wait for him to meet up with them. If the army he led was a day late to Yuta City, it could affect Lord Kenshin's plan. Therefore, the fleet formed by the 3 divine warships rushed to Yuta City at their fastest speed. Along the way, there were naturally large numbers of scouts and spies. They were the eyes that Commander Mingi had left in the various regions of Reincarnation Island. Those scouts and spies might not be very strong, but their observation skills and intelligence-gathering abilities were very outstanding. When Commander Mingi gathered the soldiers back to defend Yutu, he didn't recall those scouts and spies. He left them in the various regions so that they could gather intelligence. Therefore, when the scouts and spies in the various regions discovered Patriarch Song He's tracks, they hurriedly reported to Commander Mingi. When Commander Mingi knew the tracks of Patriarch Song He and the 7,500 soldiers, he estimated how long it would take for them to reach Yuta City. Everyone knew that after these 7,500 soldiers met up with Kenshin, Kenshin would definitely attack Yuta City. In other words, when Patriarch Song He's army reached Yuta City, the decisive battle would begin. 5 days. At most, 5 days later, the 2 armies of the Rebel Alliance would meet up and attack Yuta City. This was the result of Commander Mingi's estimation. He gathered the 18 region lords, the numerous generals, and the divine kings and told them the answer. At the same time, he mobilized the strong practitioners before the battle again. Everyone still had 5 days left to rest and recuperate and conserve their energy. 5 days later, it would be the time to fight with their lives to protect Yuta City. If they won, he would reward all the soldiers with the most generous rewards. If they were defeated, he would face death along with all the other soldiers. The numerous divine kings felt Commander Mingi's determination and were touched. They all expressed their determination and attitude, swearing to live and die with Yuta City. General Mingi and the soldiers thought that they still had 5 days to catch their breath and make all the necessary preparations. But in reality, Ji Tianqing still decided to take the risk and sneak into Yuta City after serious consideration and analysis. When he made this decision, the Hidden Dragon clan leader and the Kuei clan leader were beside him. The 2 patriarchs thought that this decision was too risky and tried to dissuade Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing was stubborn and insisted on sneaking into Yuta City to find a chance to assassinate Commander Mingi. The 2 clan leaders could not persuade him, so they could only give up. However, Ji Tianqing had another thought. The 5,000 soldiers of the 2 clans could stay and rest, but if the 2 clan leaders stayed, it would be a waste of soldiers. Therefore, he changed his mind and decided to bring along the Hidden Dragon Patriarch and the Kuei Tribe Patriarch. When the 2 patriarchs heard this order, they were stunned. They thought to themselves that Lord Kenshin had outstanding abilities and was unrivaled in the world. Even if it was risky to assassinate Commander Mingi in Yuta City, it should be enough to protect themselves. There shouldn't be any danger to their lives. However, if the 2 of them sneaked into Yuta and exposed themselves, wouldn't they be dead meat if they were surrounded by tens of thousands of soldiers? The 2 of them were timid and resisted in their hearts. However, they couldn't disobey Kenshin's orders. Otherwise, the heavenly punishment would chop them into dregs immediately. After a moment of silence, the 2 patriarchs could only bow with a bitter expression, indicating that they would follow the orders. Ji Tianqing saw through their inner thoughts and couldn't help laughing to himself. He advised them with a calm tone, risk and reward coexist. Don't the 2 of you want to contribute? Follow me to sneak into Yuta City and assassinate Commander Mingi. Once the mission is completed, what do you think of this contribution? With his reminder, the 2 patriarchs instantly came to a realization. Their eyes lit up, and they were very excited and expectant. They were well aware that if they were able to successfully assassinate Commander Mingi, it would be a great merit. At this moment, Ji Tianqing continued, "Furthermore, if the two of you follow me to carry out the assassination mission, would you still be afraid of being surrounded?" The eyes of the two patriarchs became even brighter, and their heartbeats sped up. Their blood also flowed faster. "That's right. With Lord Kenshin leading us, what are we still afraid of? If even Lord Kenshin can't defeat Commander Mingi and the guards of Yudu, we will definitely be defeated. When that time comes, Lord Kenshin will fall, and we won't be able to escape death. Lord Kenshin is the main force in carrying out the mission. Even if Commander Mingi and the army surround us, they will mainly target Kenshin." These thoughts flashed through the minds of the two patriarchs at the same time, and they instantly made up their minds. "Lord Kenshin, don't worry, subordinate is willing to follow you to carry out the mission. I will definitely risk my life to share your worries. I will follow Lord Kenshin's orders, subordinate is willing to climb a mountain of swords and dive into a sea of fire. I will never back down." The two patriarchs bowed at the same time to express their determination to Ji Tianqing. Their tone was very impassioned. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "I will give you 15 minutes to prepare. After you are done, gather here again. Of course, this matter must be kept a secret, and no fourth person must know about it." The two patriarchs were stunned, and the hidden dragon chief subconsciously asked, "Lord Kenshin, are we going to leave quietly without even informing the elders? In that case, if we leave for a few days, will there be any problems if they stay here?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "I have already given the order for all the soldiers to rest in the divine ship and conserve their energy. Patriarch Song He's army will only arrive in 5 days to meet up with us. In these 5 days, there won't be any problems if they stay here. 5 days is enough for us to complete the mission." After hearing his explanation, the two patriarchs no longer had any worries and hurriedly left the study. 15 minutes later, the two patriarchs finished their preparations and came to the study to gather with Ji Tianqing. After that, the three of them quietly left the divine ship and flew toward Yuda City under the cover of the night sky. If they wanted to enter Yuda City, they would first have to cross the poisonous fog that was 5,000 miles wide and then cross the Black Water River that was 50 miles wide before they could reach the city walls. The defenses near the south city gate of Yuda City were very strong and heavily guarded. Since Ji Tianqing was going to assassinate Commander Styx, he naturally wouldn't choose the south city gate as his breakthrough point. He brought the two patriarchs and hurried toward the northwest. He chose an area with weaker defenses as his breakthrough point. Not long later, the three of them arrived at the poisonous fog area. The two patriarchs were still wary of the poisonous fog's power and were thinking about how to break it. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing put them into the internal space of the primordial chaos bell and barged straight into the poisonous fog. Chapter 42-46. The two clan heads were shocked at first, but they soon understood. Although the toxic fog was very powerful and troublesome, Kenyan God King was already a God King. He must have cultivated an invincible divine body that was impervious to all poisons. Naturally, he wouldn't be afraid of the toxic fog's corrosion. Instead of bringing them along and wasting time trying to disperse the fog, he might as well put them into the divine artifact and let Kenshin pass through the fog. It was simpler and more direct. As expected. In order not to alarm the God King experts in Yuda City, Ji Tianqing didn't use his divine power when he passed through the toxic fog. But even so, the surging toxic mist didn't cause him any harm even though it was corroding his body. His current abilities were already dozens of times stronger than ordinary peak God Kings. Even if Commander Styx hit him with his full power, it wouldn't cause him any harm, let alone the toxic fog. The toxic fog that was 10,000 miles wide was originally very dangerous. Every step was filled with killing intent. However, Ji Tianqing passed through it as if he was walking on flat ground. Next, he arrived at the Black Water River that was 100 miles wide and used a divine ability secret technique to conceal his figure and aura. The Black Water River looked like a pitch-black river that was 100 miles wide. Endless black water flowed endlessly, creating countless splashes. However, in reality, the entire Black Water River was like a three-dimensional barrier. It was like a wall of death. An extremely dense power of death enveloped a radius of 1,000 miles, protecting the entire Yuta city. The hazy black death aura covered the sky and covered the sun. The Black River water that flowed endlessly had a terrifying power that could devour souls and corrode bones. It could even poison a high-level god king to death. Even experts like the Hidden Dragon clan head and the Kuei clan head would have to spend a lot of effort to cross it safely. However, Ji Tianqing ignored the barrier formed by the Black Death aura. He took a step and crossed 100 miles. He passed through the wall of death and arrived at the other side of the Black Water River. Just like that, the two layers of obstruction that Commander Styx had painstakingly set up were easily passed through by Ji Tianqing. He arrived at the bottom of the city wall and secretly released his divine senses to observe the situation in Yuta City. The city walls that were 1,000 feet tall formed a circle with a radius of a few hundred miles, protecting Yuta City. On the wide and majestic city wall, there were many soldiers densely arranged. All of them were wearing bright armors and carrying sabers and swords. They had a solemn and vigilant posture. In the sky above Yuta City, there were over 100 patrol teams that circled around continuously to monitor the movements outside the city. Of course, Ji Tianqing did not care about these things. Those soldiers were all at the Divine Lord realm. Only some captains and commanders were Divine King realm powerhouses. Over a month ago, he had entered Yudu and investigated the situation of the defenses. After he had killed Blood Hell Marshal and refined his memories, he had a clearer understanding of the defenses of Yuta City. At this moment, after some observation, he discovered the problem. As I expected, after Blood Hell Marshal was killed, Commander Mingi made a large-scale adjustment to the defenses of Yuta City. Originally, in his memory, this section of the city wall in front of him was the weakest point of the defense. However, after Commander Mingi adjusted the defenses, this place was no longer weak. Even so, Ji Tianqing did not plan on changing locations. He began to observe the Great City Barrier Formation. After using an hour to clearly see the structure of the formation, he pondered for another hour to deduce a way to crack it. Next, it was time to test his attainments in the formation path and his abilities. Not only did he have to cast spells to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, but he also had to silently chisel out a gap without alerting the guards on the city wall. It was not difficult to crack the formation, but to use god power and divine arts to crack the formation without alerting the guards nearby was harder than ascending to the heavens. In the eyes of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, this was almost an impossible task. Not to mention the Divine Lord guards on the city wall, with Kenshin's abilities and methods, he should be able to hide it. However, no matter how useless the Divine King powerhouses and the guards were, it was impossible for them not to sense the god power fluctuations of someone casting spells. However, when Ji Tianqing began to cast spells to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, the two clan leaders who were observing the battle in the world inside the bell were dumbfounded. This was because Ji Tianqing was able to multitask. He could cast spells to crack the Great City Barrier Formation while also casting spells to conceal the god power's aura. Moreover, his control over his god power was extremely precise and could be said to be extremely ingenious. Strands of god power were continuously injected into the Great City Barrier Formation, silently changing the structure of the formation and breaking down the structure of the formation. However, not a single strand of extra power leaked out. As for the extremely weak and undetectable god power fluctuations, they were completely concealed by his divine arts and secret techniques. Not only did the guards on the city wall not notice anything unusual, even the two clan leaders could not sense the god power fluctuations. At this moment, the the two clan leaders had a further understanding of Kenshin's abilities and methods. They were even more shocked and impressed. Unknowingly, 12 hours had passed. Under normal circumstances, Ji Tianqing would only need 4 hours to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, but he had finally opened a gap. The key was that the Great City Barrier Formation had a fist-sized gap, but there was nothing unusual about the formation. It was still operating quietly and steadily. The guards on the city wall naturally did not notice anything unusual. Swish! Ji Tianqing shrunk his body and quickly passed through the gap like a speck of dust. He entered the Great City Barrier Formation. Then, this speck of dust silently flew over the city wall and into the city. During the entire process, the guards on the city wall were like stone statues. They did not react at all. The two clan leaders in the world inside the bell witnessed the entire process clearly. Other than shock, there was only reverence in their hearts. Ji Tianqing had long been familiar with the topography and structure of Yuda City. He returned to his normal form and remained invisible. He silently flew over half of the city and arrived outside the Netherworld Divine Palace. Yudu City had a radius of a few hundred miles, and the Netherworld Divine Palace was a majestic group of palaces that occupied a radius of a few dozen miles. It was almost a city within a city. The defenses of this inner city were even tighter, and the number of guards had also doubled. The most troublesome thing was that this inner city also had a Great City Barrier Formation. Moreover, this Great City Barrier Formation was personally set up by the god of the underworld 1,000 years ago. It was a genuine supreme-grade king barrier formation. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to find a secluded place where the guards were relatively weak and repeat his previous actions. He observed the Great City Barrier Formation and looked for a way to crack it. Then, he multitasked again. As he tried to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, he used a secret technique to conceal his divine power fluctuations. This time, the difficulty of cracking the Great City Barrier Formation was even higher. Ji Tianqing's mental energy was also more exhausted. Of course, it would also take a longer time to crack the Great City Barrier Formation. He used an entire day to successfully crack the Great City Barrier Formation without alerting anyone. Finally, he managed to sneak into the Netherworld Divine Palace in the middle of the night. Chapter 42-47. Even though it was late at night, the hundreds of palaces in the Netherworld Divine Palace were still brightly lit and filled with people. There were large groups of guards guarding the main roads and gates. In the sky, in the depths of the earth, and in many buildings, there were many hidden sentries and Divine King experts. This was the core of Reincarnation Island's power and Commander Mingi's lair. Of course, it was the most heavily guarded place. Even with Ji Tianqing's strength, he had to be careful if he didn't want to alert the guards and Divine King experts here. He shuttled through the many palaces in the Divine Palace, silently wandering, looking for traces of Commander Mingi. At the same time, he quietly released a wisp of divine consciousness to carefully investigate the situation around him. After about 100 breaths of time, he figured out the defensive situation of the Netherworld Divine Palace. There were 50,000 soldiers under Commander Mingi's command stationed in Yudu. 30,000 of them were stationed on the city walls, as well as the main roads and important buildings in the city. They were also responsible for patrolling and supervising the entire city. The Netherworld Divine Palace, which had a circumference of a few dozen miles, was actually guarded by 20,000 soldiers, and there were even 200 God King experts among them. It was clear that Commander Mingi had concentrated his high-end combat power and 40% of his soldiers in the Netherworld Divine Palace. Even if Yudu City was breached, he could rely on the defense of the Netherworld Divine Palace to continue resisting the attacks of the Rebel Alliance. Of course, this was only Commander Mingi's plan. As Ji Tianqing infiltrated the Netherworld Divine Palace, his plan and premeditation were destined to be ruined. In the blink of an eye, an hour passed. Ji Tianqing searched the Netherworld Divine Palace but couldn't find Commander Mingi. After a round of searching, he had a clear understanding of the defenses in the Divine Palace. It turned out that Commander Mingi had also adjusted the defense and distribution of troops in the Divine Palace. There were some differences from the Blood Hell Marshal's memory. In addition, when Ji Tianqing was looking for Commander Mingi, he found that the morale of the guards wasn't high. Many of them were tired and passive. It could be seen that the guards were vigilant and alert, ready to fight at any time. They must have been like this for a few days. After all, they were only at the Divine Lord realm. It was difficult to maintain a tense state for long periods of time. It was inevitable that they were tired. Moreover, the 20,000 defenders were divided into many factions. They belonged to the 18 region lords, a few ancient clans, and a few top forces. Another portion of the guards were the original forbidden guards of the Nether God Palace. These 20,000 defenders were pieced together by many different forces, causing them to not obey each other and not have any tacit understanding. Usually, a garrison of 1 to 2,000 people would only listen to the orders of their leader. If Commander Mingi wanted to give an order, he couldn't pass it directly to the defending army. He had to pass it on through the many domain lords, generals, and god kings. This undoubtedly showed that it was very difficult for the defending army to display their full combat strength. In the future, if the rebel alliance were to attack Yuda city, this would be one of the advantageous conditions. Returning to the main topic, Ji Tianqing collected his thoughts and began to ponder where Commander Styx was hiding. The most dignified Divine Palace was where the meeting hall was located. If Commander Mingi wanted to gather the generals for a meeting, he would definitely appear there. Furthermore, for the past 1,000 years, Commander Styx had spent most of his time in that Divine Palace. However, after Ji Tianqing checked that Divine Palace and the 2 underground palaces hidden underground, he still couldn't find Commander Mingi. According to the memories of the Blood Hell Marshal, he found 2 hiding places of the Nether River commanders. One was the Surging Waves Tavern in the depths of the Divine Palace. It was located beside the Surging Waves Lake and had a quiet environment. It contained 100,000 books and was very heavily guarded. When Commander Mingi wasn't dealing with government affairs or cultivating in seclusion, he would often stay in the Surging Waves Tavern for a few days, quietly reading books or thinking about problems. The other place was an ordinary palace in the depths of the Divine Palace. In that palace, there were a few family members of Commander Mingi and a large number of guards and servants serving them. When Commander Mingi was in a bad mood, tired, or worried, he would stay with his family members for a few days. Ji Tianqing analyzed that with the current situation, Commander Mingi must be in a bad mood and under great pressure. Furthermore, Commander Mingi was in charge of the overall situation and had to think about many problems calmly. Therefore, both places could be Commander Mingi's hiding place. Ji Tianqing secretly rushed to the Surging Waves Tavern and used a small trick to deceive the guards and sneak into the Surging Waves Tavern. However, he released his consciousness and executed divine arts and secret techniques to search the Surging Waves Tavern carefully, but he still couldn't find Commander Mingi. He could only leave the Surging Waves Tavern and head to the second hiding place. That inconspicuous palace looked very ordinary on the surface, but its defenses were even tighter than the other palaces. However, this wasn't a problem for Ji Tianqing at all. He used divine arts and secret techniques to sneak into the palace and carefully search for 15 minutes. He did find a few family members of Commander Mingi, but he still couldn't find Commander Mingi. This time, he was in a complete dilemma and couldn't help but think, Netherworld Divine Palace is only so big, with a radius of a few dozen miles. I've already searched everywhere. Where is Commander Mingi hiding? Could it be that this sly old fellow had already predicted that I would come to assassinate him, so he hid in advance? Or could it be that he abandoned the guards of Yuda city and left Yuda city long ago to escape by himself? Ji Tianqing pondered for a moment and felt that the second possibility wasn't very likely. The most likely possibility was that Commander Mingi was still hiding. Therefore, he continued to wander around the Netherworld Divine Palace and started a carpet search. After 15 minutes, he found a clue as expected. 10 domain lords walked out from different palaces and left the Netherworld Divine Palace at the same time. After they left the inner city, they were very low-key and hid their tracks and auras as they quietly rushed to a certain house in the south of the city. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing was stunned for a moment before realization dawned on him and he smiled knowingly. Ha ha ha. Commander Mingi, that sly old fox, is indeed cunning. If I didn't see those 10 domain lords rushing over at the same time, who would have thought that he wouldn't hide in the safest Netherworld Divine Palace but in the marketplace? That's right. Ji Tianqing saw the 10 domain lords rushing to the house in the south of the city and guessed that they were under orders to meet Commander Mingi. As for Commander Mingi, he was hiding in an ordinary house in the marketplace. It was truly a ruse, and no one would have expected him to be here. Logically speaking, Kenshin would lead the Rebel Alliance's army and pay a huge price to take over Yuta City. They would definitely head straight for the Netherworld Divine Palace. At that time, the 20,000 guards and 200 God King experts guarding the Netherworld Divine Palace would definitely counterattack with all their might. Commander Mingi, who was hiding in the marketplace, would be ignored by the Rebel Alliance. He could take advantage of the chaos to escape Yuta City. By the time the Rebel Alliance took over the Netherworld Divine Palace and discovered that Commander Mingi was missing, it would be too late to search and kill him. Commander Mingi's move was indeed brilliant and daring. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42-48. Luckily, Ji Tianqing had entered Yuta City in advance to assassinate Commander Mingi. If he had attacked Yuta City step by step, occupied Netherworld Divine Palace, and then killed Commander Mingi, he would have fallen for the trap. By then, even if Kenshin could take over Yuta City and control the entire Reincarnation Island, they wouldn't be able to eliminate the source of the problem. Commander Mingi had escaped. Even if he didn't dare to take revenge, he was still a huge threat. With his shrewdness, scheming, and ability, it was impossible for any other God King to go against him. Only the stronger and more meticulous Ji Tianqing could destroy Commander Mingi's scheme. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing decisively left Netherworld Divine Palace and followed the few territorial lords to a certain house in the south of the city. Xianlong and Kuei tribe patriarch, who were in the world inside the bell, didn't know what had happened. Out of curiosity, the two couldn't help but ask Ji Tianqing what had happened. Why didn't he continue to search for Commander Mingi's tracks? Ji Tianqing replied but didn't explain. He just asked them to watch carefully. After a while, Ji Tianqing followed the few territorial lords and arrived at a certain house in the south of the city. The house looked simple, but its interior was exquisite and luxurious. Its defensive power was also very strong. Not only were there 500 elite Imperial Guards standing guard here, there were also over 30 God King experts lying in ambush in various places, either in the open or in the dark. In addition, 2 8th-level Divine King Realm Forbidden Guard commanders were also here. In addition to the 10 domain lords who had just arrived, there were actually 45 Godly King experts gathered in this very ordinary-looking courtyard. The 10 disguised territorial lords entered the underground secret room of the house after a series of checks and identity checks. They finally met Commander Mingi. The thin, white-haired Commander Mingi wore a gray robe. His aura was even colder, and he looked much older than half a year ago. In the dimly lit secret room, he sat on the throne at the head, quietly resting with his eyes closed. 2 Forbidden Guard commanders stood on either side of him, wearing armor and holding swords. They were like 2 door gods. After the 10 domain lords entered the secret chamber, they removed their disguises and revealed their true faces. They bowed and greeted Commander Mingi. After the 2 sides exchanged greetings, the 10 domain lords stood in 2 rows. Only then did Commander Mingi begin the discussion. He first asked the 10 domain lords about the situation of the city's defenses, as well as the information they had gathered. Next, everyone began to discuss how to set up defenses, arrange troops, and so on. The atmosphere was very oppressive and heavy. Everyone's heart was heavy. None of them were optimistic about the upcoming decisive battle. They were extremely worried. The door to the secret room was shut, and it was protected by a formation. There were 4 God King experts standing guard outside. Ji Tianqing arrived at the gate. Finally, there was no need to hide anymore. He decisively made a move, using a divine ability and ultimate skill to kill the 2 divine king powerhouses guarding the door. At the same time, he opened up the world inside the bell and released Qian Long and Kuei clan's patriarch so that they could kill the other 2 god kings. Swish swish. Bang bang. After a sword light pierced through the air and 2 dull thuds, the 4 god kings guarding the door fell to the ground as blood splattered everywhere. The 2 god kings that Ji Tianqing killed were killed in a single strike. Even their godheads were shattered. As for the 2 god kings that the 2 clan patriarchs dealt with, they only had their heads and necks severed. Their bodies were destroyed, but their godheads were still intact. Ji Tianqing added 2 more sword lights before he was able to instantly kill the 2 god kings. Without a doubt, there was a commotion as an intense divine power fluctuation erupted. Commander Mingi and the 10 domain lords in the secret chamber were immediately awakened. They quickly ended the discussion and checked the situation outside the secret chamber. Ji Tianqing did not hold back as he punched the door of the secret chamber. Kaboom! Following an earth-shattering sound, the door of the secret chamber was blasted into smithereens. A huge hole was blasted in the defensive formation. Dust splattered and covered the secret chamber in a radius of 300 meters. It turned the secret chamber into a turbid mess. With such an unforeseen event, Commander Mingi's pupils contracted. He turned around without hesitation and turned into a black shadow as he flew towards the corner of the secret chamber. In the seemingly empty corner of the secret chamber, there was actually a secret door that led to the array altar underground. It was a teleportation array that was directly connected to Yuta City. It could teleport him to a stronghold 1,000,000 miles away. Before the 10 domain lords could react, they saw Commander Mingi escaping the secret chamber as fast as a ghost. They were stunned. At this moment, Ji Tianqing also turned into a golden light and flew into the secret chamber. He flew over the heads of the 10 domain lords and chased after Commander Mingi. Qian Long and Kuei clan patriarchs were slightly slower. After they followed Ji Tianqing into the secret chamber, they were also stunned. Swish! Ji Tianqing had already gone through the secret passage at the corner of the secret chamber to chase after Commander Mingi. The 2 clan patriarchs were stunned in the middle of the secret chamber as they were stared at by the 10 domain lords. Their bodies instantly stiffened, and their expressions were especially awkward. It's over. This thought flashed across the minds of the 2 clan patriarchs at the same time. After a breath of time, the 10 domain lords finally recovered from their astonishment. Their gazes gathered on the 2 clan patriarchs. After recognizing their identities, their gazes and expressions became strange and complicated. A few of the domain lords revealed killing intent on their faces or revealed sinister sneers. They couldn't afford to offend Kenshin, but could it be that they couldn't afford to offend the 2 clan patriarchs of the ancient clans? Seeing that the 10 domain lords revealed their killing intent and were about to attack, the 2 clan patriarchs were quick-witted and hurriedly spoke to save themselves. Ha ha ha. Qian Long's clan patriarch was complaining incessantly in his heart, but he didn't show any fear on his face. He even laughed loudly with an imposing manner. Lord Kenshin is indeed wise. He guessed that you fellows would come here in the middle of the night to meet Commander Mingi. I didn't expect it to be so. Surrender yourselves. I will plead with Lord Kenshin to spare your lives. The Kuei clan patriarch also reacted and hurriedly put on an arrogant and proud attitude. He sneered at the 10 domain lords and said, "Everyone, you didn't expect this, did you? Ha ha ha. Waiting for Lord Kenshin to lead an army to attack Yuta City? Then the 2 armies will fight head-on." You are too naive. All of Commander Mingi's schemes and plans are under the control of Lord Kenshin. Lord Kenshin has already chased after him, and Commander Mingi is about to lose his life. If you don't want to die, then stay here obediently. When Lord Kenshin returns, immediately admit defeat and surrender. It was clearly the two clan patriarchs who were surrounded by 10 domain lords and were in imminent danger. However, the two of them were arrogant. Their words and attitudes made it seem as if they had surrounded the 10 domain lords. The 10 domain lords originally wanted to attack, but when they saw the reaction of the two clan patriarchs, they instantly hesitated. Kenshin really came? Heavens! Previously, the Grand Commander was worried that Kenshin would sneak into Yuta City and carry out the assassination in advance. I didn't expect that he guessed correctly. That golden light that passed by just now was Kenshin. It passed by right in front of my eyes, but I didn't see it clearly at all. It's over. Kenshin is here. We are all going to die. The 10 domain lords looked at each other and were somewhat flustered as they discussed in a daze. Chapter 42-49. Kenshin's reputation was too terrifying. Billions of people worshipped him, and countless divine kings revered and respected him. Even the 10 zone masters, although they were high-level divine kings, were also very afraid of Kenshin. In the past, Kenshin's whereabouts were unknown, and the zone masters didn't see him in person. They only revered him in their hearts. At this moment, Kenshin had just flown past them and was chasing after Commander Mingi underground. After Kenshin dealt with Commander Mingi, he would come to kill them. How could the 10 zone masters not be terrified? Everyone's first reaction was to immediately escape. The further away they were from Kenshin, the safer they would be. However, these zone masters were all people of high positions and were meticulous people. They definitely wouldn't be rash and impulsive. They immediately thought of a problem. Since Kenshin had personally made a move, then the army under Kenshin must be lying in ambush outside Yuta City. Once they escaped Yuta, they would be walking into a trap. Surrounded by an army of over 10,000, they would definitely die. Moreover, they would be smashed into pieces. They couldn't escape, but they couldn't stay either. The zone masters were all flustered and didn't know what to do. Of course, there were also 2 zone masters who wanted to capture the 2 chiefs and use them as hostages to save their own lives. However, on second thought, it was easy to capture the 2 chiefs, but it was hard to say if they could threaten Kenshin. Once they did that, they would completely become enemies with Kenshin. It would be difficult for them to not die. Thus, the 2 zone masters hurriedly dismissed the idea. Seeing that these zone masters were stunned and had no intention of making a move, Hidden Dragon and Kuei clan's chief looked at each other and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. However, the zone masters were only hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. They didn't put down their weapons and continued to surround the 2 of them. Their nerves were tense. The 2 chiefs could only continue to persuade and threaten them, hoping that they would dispel the idea of taking the risk. If they could persuade the 10 zone masters to surrender without making a move, it would be a great merit. Thus, the Kuei clan's chief used his glib tongue and started to attack the 10 zone masters. Domain lords, I'm sure you already know that Commander Styx is definitely not a match for Kenshin. Yuta City was destined to fall, and Reincarnation Island was destined to be controlled by Lord Kenshin. Even if you risk your lives, you won't be able to change this result. Even if you kill me and the Hidden Dragon Patriarch now, it won't affect the overall situation at all. Lord Kenshin will soon kill Commander Styx, and the army of our rebel alliance will also launch an attack into Yuta City. Once you take action, you will be listed as enemies by the rebel alliance. You are destined to die under the Kenshin sword. If you surrender now, you can still keep your lives. At this moment, the 10 domain lords had already calmed down. Hearing the Kuei clan's patriarch's words, the other domain lords frowned and revealed doubtful expressions. What did you say? Will the Kenshin let us go? We are the subjects of the god of the underworld. If the Kenshin wants to rule the reincarnation island, how could they spare us? Don't speak carelessly. You are just stalling for time. Cut the crap. Since we are going to die either way, we might as well kill you and drag the two of you down with us. As they spoke, the domain lords clenched their swords and sabers, and blazing killing intent burst forth from their bodies. The two patriarchs were rather nervous, but their expressions were very calm as they continued to persuade the other party. Everything I said is the truth. Why don't you believe me? Lord Kenshin said before that domain lords like you have different statuses. As long as you surrender, you will be spared from death and will be given a lighter punishment. Those who perform well can even be exempted from punishment and continue to be the domain lord. In his anxiety, the hidden dragon patriarch spoke the truth, without thinking. However, just as he reached the crucial part, he was stopped by the Kuei clan's patriarch. The Kuei clan's patriarch hurriedly gave him a look that said, "Why are you so reckless? How can you reveal the details?" Only then did the hidden dragon patriarch react. He immediately stopped talking, and his face was full of annoyance. It seemed that he was also very depressed and regretful that he could not keep the secret. However, the 10 domain lords heard it clearly. Instantly, their eyes lit up, and they became spirited. What did you say just now? As long as we surrender, we can be spared from death. Those who perform well can be exempted from punishment and can even continue to be the domain lord. Hidden Dragon Kwa, are you serious about this? Hidden Dragon Kwa, you should know very well that this concerns everyone's life and death. You must tell us the truth. Otherwise, we would rather fight to the death and kill the two of you first. If you don't want to tell us, then we will ask Kenshin and confront him face to face. It was very obvious that in the hearts of the 10 domain lords, loyalty to the god of the underworld and Commander Styx was definitely not the most important thing. Their lives and whether they could keep their positions as domain lords were the most important. If they wanted to surrender to Kenshin, they first had to keep their lives. If they could be exempted from punishment and not have to pay any price, that would be the best. If Kenshin was magnanimous and could keep their positions as domain lords, that would be an unexpected surprise. Therefore, they were very eager to know whether the hidden dragon patriarch was telling the truth or not. If what the hidden dragon patriarch said was true, then they would have no more worries and could immediately surrender when they saw Kenshin. If the hidden dragon patriarch was lying to deceive them, then it would be too late to kill the hidden dragon patriarch and the Kuei tribe patriarch now and escape. Faced with 10 pairs of burning, sharp, and majestic gazes, the hidden dragon patriarch revealed a helpless and bitter smile. He scratched his head and muttered, "It's all my fault for speaking without thinking. Now, Lord Kenshin will definitely punish me." The Kuei tribe patriarch also sighed and patted his shoulder, comforting him, "Hidden dragon patriarch, you're just too straightforward and can't hide things in your heart. It's because Lord Kenshin understands your nature that he asked me to accompany you. Back then, Kenshin told us to keep this a secret, but you..." Sigh. "Forget it, when Lord Kenshin pursues the matter, I will plead for mercy for you." After hearing the Kuei tribe patriarch's comforting words, the hidden dragon patriarch's mood improved a lot. As for the 10 domain lords, when they heard their conversation and saw their expressions and reactions, they all understood the reason and process. It turned out that those words were indeed said by Kenshin. Kenshin told his thoughts to the few ancient clans' patriarchs, but ordered them to keep it a secret and not to casually leak it out. Just now, the hidden dragon patriarch was in a dangerous situation, and in a moment of desperation, he couldn't hold back and revealed the truth. Seeing that the hidden dragon patriarch and the Kuei tribe patriarch's reactions didn't seem to be fake, the 10 domain lords were relieved. They looked at each other and hurriedly discussed with each other through telepathy whether they should admit defeat and surrender. At this moment, a loud rumbling sound suddenly came from deep underground. The ground under everyone's feet trembled violently, and a few wide cracks appeared. Obviously, it was caused by the battle between Kenshin and Commander Styx. Chapter 4250. In fact, after Ji Tianqing chased underground, he stopped Commander Mingi who was preparing to escape. The two of them didn't fight directly. Instead, they chatted for a while. The content of the conversation was simple. It was nothing more than Commander Mingi being shocked, angry, and somewhat indignant. He had clearly guessed that Kenshin would sneak into Yuta City and take the risk to assassinate him alone. Moreover, he had also made preparations to hide in this inconspicuous house. Under normal circumstances, even if Kenshin sneaked into Yuta and killed his way into Netherworld Divine Palace, he wouldn't be able to find him. And after he received the news, he could quietly escape Yuta and fly far away. But man proposes, God disposes. Kenshin had to sneak into Yuta City tonight, and he happened to gather the 10 domain lords for a meeting. Even though he was very careful and made the 10 domain lords disguise themselves and hide their appearances and auras, they were still targeted by Kenshin. All of this was because Kenshin was strong enough. But Commander Mingi felt that it was more luck. Kenshin's luck was simply too good. He was completely blessed by the heavens. Ji Tianqing didn't deny this point. He smiled and said, "Haven't you heard the rumors of the boundless heaven continent? I am the embodiment of justice, the spokesperson of the heavenly Tao. Even the power of the heavenly Tao is helping me. Reading the heavenly Tao oath that I made, I will be bound by the heavenly Tao. Therefore, isn't it natural for the heavens to bless me?" Commander Mingi was so angry that his face turned black. He immediately cursed and scolded the heavens for being unfair. Ji Tianqing wasn't angry. He looked at him with a smile and persuaded him to admit defeat obediently so that he could die with dignity. Ji Tianqing had to kill Commander Mingi without a doubt. Even if the other party surrendered, he definitely wouldn't let him off. Commander Mingi scolded Ji Tianqing because he wanted to anger Ji Tianqing so that he could take the opportunity to open the teleportation formation and escape Yuta City. However, Ji Tianqing wasn't angered. He continued to stare at him. Commander Acheron secretly took out a jade slip and was about to toss it into the teleportation array. At the critical moment, Ji Tianqing used a supreme divine ability to seal the entire underground palace, freezing the space within a radius of 10,000 feet. In the next instant, he seized the jade slip and smashed it to pieces. The jade strip was the key to open the transmission array, but it was destroyed by Ji Tianqing. If Commander Styx wanted to open the array again, he would have to cast a spell, and that would take 10 breaths of time. At this time, Ji Tianqing no longer talked nonsense with him and had already launched an attack. Swish! 4 beams of golden sword light locked onto Commander Styx with invisible sword intent. Commander Styx knew that he couldn't escape, but he couldn't just sit there and wait for death. He could only fight back. Therefore, he unleashed his ultimate skill with all his might to block the 4 sword lights. Unfortunately, the surrounding space had been sealed, and Commander Styx could not move an inch. There was no way for him to dodge. Bang bang! Just as he condensed a shield of divine power, he was struck by the 4 sword lights, and 2 dull thuds rang out. The shield he condensed with all his strength was strong, but it couldn't block the attack of the sword lights. It collapsed on the spot, and fragments of divine light burst out. Then, he was blown away by the sword lights, and he smashed into the sacrificial altar while vomiting blood. Whine! The silent sacrificial altar trembled violently from the impact, and it lit up with hazy 5-colored divine light. Commander Styx finally got close to the sacrificial altar. He just needed to open the teleportation array, and he could leave Yuta. However, his chest and abdomen were pierced by the sword lights, and he was already severely injured. Casting a spell to activate the formation had become an extravagant hope that was impossible to accomplish. Swish swish! Before Commander Styx could get up, Ji Tianqing raised his hand and struck out with 2 sword lights that were like 2 bolts of lightning. The underground palace was only 10,000 feet in radius, and the terrain was narrow. The distance between the two was too close. From the time the sword lights lit up to when they hit Commander Styx, it was only 1/5 of an instant. In such a short time, the heavily injured Commander Styx couldn't react at all, let alone cast a spell to block. Bam! The two sword lights hit Commander Styx at the same time, and a loud, dull sound reverberated through the underground. The power of these two swords was too great. Not only did they kill Commander Styx on the spot, but they also smashed him into pieces. After destroying Commander Styx's body, the two sword lights also hit the sacrificial altar. The sacrificial altar, which was 60 feet tall, was smashed into pieces on the spot. Countless rocks and metal splattered out, flashing with divine light. The terrifying force carried countless fragments and formed a shockingly powerful air wave that blasted out in all directions. Instantly, the entire Yuta city started to tremble violently. The courtyard above Ji Tianqing's head was shaken until the sky collapsed and the earth caved in. Dust flew up everywhere. The simple and elegant courtyard collapsed, and a few wide cracks appeared on the ground. The Divine King's strong practitioners who were lying in ambush were also alarmed. In an instant, the entire Yuta city fell into panic. With the courtyard as the center, the surrounding dozens of miles fell into chaos. Commander Styx's body was destroyed, but his godhead was luckily preserved. Swish! The walnut-sized 5-colored crystal core burst out with lightning speed and instantly passed through the turbid air wave, trying to escape underground. However, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and struck out with a golden dragon claw, accurately grabbing onto Commander Styx's godhead. There was no superfluous words, and there was no way he would show mercy. No matter how furiously Commander Styx cursed or how helplessly he begged for mercy, it was useless. With a crisp cracking sound, Commander Styx's godhead was crushed by Ji Tianqing, turning into more than a dozen fragments. An overlord of a generation had fallen just like that. Ji Tianqing kept Commander Styx's godhead fragments and passed through the billowing smoke and dust. He ignored the collapsing soil and bricks and left the underground palace. Swish! The next moment, he returned to the surface and appeared in the study that was full of cracks. What was surprising was that the entire courtyard was in a mess. Many guards and Divine King experts were trying to find out what had happened. Meanwhile, the 10 domain lords and the patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan were still in a deadlock in the study. At this point, the 10 domain lords still hadn't left or escaped. It was enough to prove that they had already discussed and reached a consensus. Even though they were still holding on to their divine weapons and surrounded the patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, they didn't have much hostility or killing intent. As for the patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, not only were they not worried or apprehensive, but they were also secretly laughing. It was because the conversation between the two was deliberately put on a show to make the 10 domain lords believe them. The facts proved that the 10 domain lords did indeed believe them without any doubts. Your subordinate pays his respects to Lord Kenshin. Everyone in the study was silent. When the two patriarchs suddenly saw Ji Tianqing appear, they quickly bowed and greeted him. The 10 domain lords were also startled. Seeing Kenshin appear, everyone was shocked and instinctively retreated. However, everyone soon reacted and quickly put away their divine weapons and bowed to Ji Tianqing. Greetings to Lord Kenshin. Chapter 42-51. Seeing the 10 domain lords put away their weapons and bowed, Ji Tianqing understood everything. He glanced at the two clan leaders and was slightly surprised. As far as he knew, these two clan leaders were not as shrewd as the other 3 clan leaders. He didn't expect that these two guys could persuade the 10 domain lords, and there was no fighting or killing between the two sides. It was really unbelievable. Everyone, rise. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly, looked at the 10 domain lords with a dignified expression, and asked, just now when I was fighting Commander Mingi in the underground palace, since you didn't follow to help, you must have the intention to repent and decided to give up the darkness and join the light, right? Although this question was asked knowingly, the process couldn't be omitted. Everyone couldn't tacitly agree that these domain lords had surrendered, right? The 10 domain lords looked at each other, somewhat embarrassed, and no one was willing to speak first. It couldn't be helped, admitting defeat was a bit shameful. As the subordinates of Commander Mingi, when Commander Mingi's life was in danger, they didn't go to help, which was a shameless act of betraying their master for glory. But 2 domain lords were thick-skinned, or they thought of the Hidden Dragon clan leader's words, people who perform well are so, and hurriedly spoke up. Sir Kenshin is right. You came to save the people of Reincarnation Island, and return peace and freedom to Reincarnation Island. The people respect and love you very much. And any country or continent should have the people as the foundation. Therefore, you are the embodiment of justice, and you can also represent the Heavenly Tao, and receive the Heavenly Tao's favor and help. Although we are lowly people, and don't dare to be mentioned in the same breath as Sir Kenshin. But when we were in charge of each domain, we also cared about the people, and loved them as our own children. We also admire and worship you from the bottom of our hearts, Sir Kenshin. The domain lord who spoke first was thin, with a fair face, and dressed like a middle-aged scholar. This person didn't have much of the valiant and stern aura of a fierce general, but more of a scholar. Obviously, he was more shrewd and thoughtful. His words were beautiful. Not only did he flatter Kenshin, but he also secretly cleared his name and expressed his intention to surrender. Of course, his claim of loving the people like his children was definitely nonsense. Whoever believed him would be a fool. When the other domain leaders saw that Ji Tianqing was so good at acting, and that he was so thick-skinned, they all threw away their sense of shame and began to flatter him, trying to increase their favorability towards Ji Tianqing. Lord Kenshin, please understand. We are actually looking out for the people. We hope that you will come soon to save the people of Reincarnation Island and restore freedom to everyone. However, as domain lords, we are under the control and restriction of Commander Styx and the Blood Prison Marshal. We really have no choice. Kenshin-sama, you've finally arrived. Commander Mingi used all sorts of methods to restrict us, forcing us to be loyal to him. Otherwise, we would be killed and our entire clan would be wiped out. We look forward to your arrival, not only for the freedom of the people, but also for our freedom and safety. These domain lords were no fools. Kenshin went underground to hunt down Commander Mingi and caused a huge commotion just now. Now that Kenshin had appeared, Commander Mingi was nowhere to be seen. It was obvious that Commander Mingi had been killed or captured by Kenshin. Since Commander Mingi was dead, the fall of Yudu and the capture of Reincarnation Island would soon become a reality. At this time, of course, they had to submit to Kenshin as quickly as possible to prove their loyalty. Moreover, in order to prove their innocence, they could also push all the blame onto Commander Mingi. The 10 domain lords fought to speak, one after another expressing their loyalty, as well as their respect and worship for Kenshin. Seeing how strong their desire to live was, Ji Tianqing sneered to himself. He didn't waste any time and raised his hand to interrupt the 10 domain lords. He took out a jade scroll and threw it in front of everyone. You should know my rules. Those who are sincere in surrendering, recite this oath of surrender. The jade scroll floated in mid-air, shining with a brilliant golden light, looking very sacred and dignified. However, the 10 domain lords stared at the jade scroll with troubled expressions, silently weighing the pros and cons. No matter how nice their words were, when it came to reciting the oath of surrender, they had to seriously consider it and weigh the pros and cons. After all, they had long heard of the horror of the oath of surrender. The domain lord, who looked like a middle-aged scholar, thought for a moment and took the lead to walk out of the crowd, picking up the jade scroll. He had long since understood the logic behind it. Since he had decided to surrender to Kenshin, he had to be decisive and not drag it out. If he acted more sincerely and positively, he could leave a good impression on Kenshin, and he might even be able to keep his position as domain lord. Lord Kenshin, I am the domain lord of Yuanpan. I know my wrongs and want to change, sincerely repent, so I've turned over a new leaf. I hope to serve under Lord Kenshin and make up for my past mistakes. After saying this, he used his consciousness to read the contents of the Jade Scroll and began to recite the Oath of Surrender. When he recited the first part of the Oath of Surrender, his expression became serious, and a hint of fear appeared in his eyes. However, with everyone staring at him, he could not stop, nor did he dare to go back on his words. Thus, he continued to recite. As he recited one oath after another, his face became paler, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. When the domain lords heard the contents of the oath, their expressions became a little ugly, and their eyes were filled with fear and worry. In the past, they had only heard of how harsh and terrifying the oaths made by Kenshin were. Now that they heard the contents of the oath with their own ears, they knew that the rumors were true. Once they recited the Oath of Surrender, they would become Kenshin's most loyal lackeys and hounds, and could not have the slightest bit of disloyalty. If they had any thoughts of endangering Kenshin's safety and interests, or disrespecting Kenshin, they would be judged by the heavenly axiom as a violation of the oath, and would be punished by the heavenly axiom, leading to death. This was Kenshin's way of doing things. It was violent and domineering, but it was the most effective. Furthermore, Kenshin did not even need to keep an eye on the person who made the oath, as the heavenly axiom would help to supervise. In comparison, Commander Styx and the Blood Hell Marshal's methods of coercing and forcing them to remain loyal were simply too weak. After a moment, the Yuan and Region Lord finished reciting the oath of the heavenly axiom. His entire body lit up with divine light, and a wisp of Tao runes appeared above his head. Muffled sounds of thunder could be heard in the sky above Yuta City. Such a phenomenon proved that the oath of the heavenly axiom had been established, and he was bound by the heavens. The Yuan and Region Lord felt the vast might of the heavens, and his heart was filled with fear. However, he appeared to be relatively calm, and after bowing respectfully to Ji Tianqing, he put the Jade Scroll back to its original place. Just as he returned to the crowd, another Region Lord took the initiative to step forward and take the Jade Scroll to recite the oath. This was also a Region Lord who was determined and wanted to do his best to perform. However, at this moment, the door of the study was blasted open, and the cracked wall on the side was also blasted apart. More than 10 Divine King experts roared as they charged into the messy study. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4252. Previously, Ji Tianqing and Commander Mingi were fighting underground, causing a huge commotion. There were as many as 500 guards stationed in this courtyard, all of them elites. In addition, there were over 30 godly king powerhouses hiding in the courtyard, protecting Commander Mingi. These people were all startled awake, first running in all directions, then asking each other what happened. Guessing that there was an attack, many godly kings and guards searched everywhere for traces of the assassin. But they searched the entire courtyard, as well as the surrounding 20 miles, but did not find anything out of the ordinary. Therefore, many godly kings were certain that the assassin was most likely still in the courtyard. Some godly kings only then remembered that they had not checked on Commander Mingi's condition, whether he was injured or not. But when the dozen godly kings arrived outside the study, they discovered that the defensive array had been activated, isolating the situation in the study, preventing people from probing. Therefore, in their anxiety, the godly kings joined forces to attack the defensive array of the study. Fortunately, that array's defense was not very strong, more to conceal aura, blocking divine senses from probing. After the dozen godly kings joined forces to attack a few times, they actually broke a hole in the array, even collapsing 2 walls. But when they rushed into the study and saw the situation inside clearly, they were dumbfounded on the spot. In the messy study, the 10 domain lords were present, but Commander Mingi was nowhere to be found. The 10 domain lords' expressions and postures were very strange. There was also a dragon clan youth in white robes in the study, looking very mysterious and dignified. Beside that white-robed youth stood 2 unfamiliar godly king powerhouses. And those 10 domain lords' postures seemed to be very respectful to the white-robed youth. What was going on? Who was that white-robed youth? There was silence in the study, everyone looked at each other, but no one spoke. Suddenly, a middle-aged godly king saw the white-robed youth's face clearly, and his expression changed drastically, subconsciously crying out in surprise. Kenshin. He's Kenshin. The sudden cry of surprise was filled with deep shock and fear. The other dozen godly kings were stunned, staring at the white-robed youth in disbelief, carefully observing and sizing him up. When the face of the white-robed young man in front of them overlapped with the face of Kenshin in their memories, everyone was horrified. That's right, he was the famous Kenshin. No one dared to believe that Kenshin would actually sneak into Yuta City alone to assassinate Commander Styx. Most importantly, Kenshin seemed to have succeeded. If Commander Styx was still alive, he would definitely show himself and fight the Kenshin or order his guards to assist him. Since Commander Mingi was nowhere to be found, and the 10 territorial lords were subservient to Kenshin, one could guess that Commander Mingi was most likely dead. Retreat. The first reaction of several god kings was to retreat immediately and flee back to the Netherworld Divine Palace. Commander Acheron might have already died. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility that Commander Styx had escaped back to the Netherworld Divine Palace. There were also 20,000 guards and 200 divine king powerhouses. It could be said to be an impregnable fortress, impregnable as a fortress. In the entire Yuta city, only the Netherworld Divine Palace could be considered safe. 9 god kings instinctively turned and rushed out of the study with this thought in mind. However, there were still 2 god kings who were too loyal to Commander Mingi or were too honest. They actually questioned Ji Tianqing and the 10 territorial lords loudly. Kenshin, you killed Commander Mingi. Territorial lords, where did Commander Mingi go? Is he injured? What are you standing there for? Why aren't you gathering the guards and fighting Kenshin together? The 2 god kings were the captains of Commander Mingi's guards. They had always been in charge of protecting Commander Mingi. Saying these words was only their instinctive reaction. However, the 9 god kings who turned and fled and the 10 territorial lords in the study were stunned when they heard this. They all looked at the 2 god kings in unison, revealing complicated expressions and gazes. Some had an expression of admiration that said, "Brother, you're really awesome." Some didn't know whether to laugh or cry, with a look that said, "Are you two really stupid or just pretending to be stupid?" Some had pity and helplessness in their gazes. The place was temporarily quiet. It was dead silent. Ji Tianqing glanced at the 2 god kings and casually shot out a dazzling golden light, which instantly enveloped the entire residence. Swoosh! A golden light barrier with a radius of 3,000 feet sealed the entire residence. Immediately, all the guards and god kings who scurried about frantically in the courtyard in search of the Styx commander all froze. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the golden light barrier, revealing angry and helpless expressions. "Since you're here, stay," Ji Tianqing said indifferently. The dozen god kings seemed to have woken up from a dream, and they immediately revealed looks of regret. It was obvious that Kenshin planned to kill them all. If they knew this would happen, they wouldn't have stopped just now. They would have fled without a care. And now, the entire residence was sealed. It was impossible to escape even if they wanted to. The patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan reacted. They hurriedly held their divine weapons and shouted at the dozen god kings at the door, "What are you waiting for? Get in here if you don't want to die. Lord Kenshin is here. If you know what's good for you, immediately admit defeat and surrender." Actually, everyone had already thought about it. Commander Mingi was definitely not Kenshin's match, and Yudu city would fall sooner or later. Therefore, this outcome was within their expectations. What they cared about the most was whether Kenshin would forgive them and spare their lives. They were so flustered just now because they were afraid that Kenshin would kill them all with just a few moves. Now, it seemed that Kenshin wasn't that cruel and violent. As long as they admitted defeat and surrendered, they still had a chance to live. The dozen god kings heaved a sigh of relief and returned to the study. Only the two guard captains of Commander Mingi's guards stood awkwardly on the spot. Just now, no one else spoke. Only the two of them questioned Kenshin and the 10 region lords righteously. They appeared to be very loyal to Commander Mingi. Now, if they didn't surrender, they would be killed. If they surrendered, it would seem that they had no moral integrity and backbone. It was too embarrassing. Luckily, everyone's minds were in a mess, and their thoughts were complicated. No one cared about their situation. The dozen god kings entered the study and bowed in unison, expressing their allegiance to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time. He couldn't even be bothered to say any high-sounding words. He directly ordered, "All of you, line up and recite the oath of surrender." Therefore, the dozen god kings instantly understood. No wonder the 10 region lords were gathered here. It looked so strange. It turned out that they were the first to admit defeat and were reciting the oath of surrender. Too despicable. These fellows were in high positions and were usually more loyal than anyone else. They didn't expect that they would surrender the moment something happened to Commander Mingi. Chapter 42-53. The dozen or so god kings and domain lords in the study came from different factions and were not harmonious with each other. In the past, everyone would fight to be the first to show their loyalty to Commander Styx and the Netherworld Divine Emperor. Because of this, there was no lack of scheming among them. Now that something had happened to Commander Styx, they had no choice but to surrender to Kenshin. Seeing the 10 domain lords surrender first and being very respectful in front of Kenshin, the dozen or so god kings were jealous and angry. They only hated themselves for not surrendering to Kenshin at the first moment. If they had performed well, they might have been able to get an official position under Kenshin. Furthermore, in front of Kenshin, it was impossible for them to play any tricks or schemes. Next, the few domain lords no longer hesitated. They all rushed to receive the jade scrolls and quickly recited the oath of surrender. Soon, divine light and Tao runes appeared on the domain lords who had recited the oath of surrender. Shocking thunder boomed in the sky above Yuda city. Ji Tianqing used his divine senses to scan the courtyard and the situation in Yuda city. He realized that the courtyard was in a mess. 500 guards and a dozen or so god kings were trying to break out of the encirclement and break through the golden light barrier. Those people already knew that something had happened to Commander Styx and guessed that Kenshin was in the study, so they didn't dare to go near. To prevent any accidents from happening, Ji Tianqing ordered the 2 clan leaders and the 3 domain lords who had already surrendered, gather everyone in the courtyard. Those who are willing to surrender, gather in the courtyard. Those who are unwilling to surrender and resist with all their might, kill them without mercy. The Hidden Dragon clan, the Kuei clan leader, and the 3 domain lords hurriedly obeyed and ran out of the study happily to carry out the mission. Especially the 3 domain lords who had just sworn the oath of surrender. They were indescribably surprised. After all, they had just surrendered and received a mission from Kenshin. This meant that Kenshin trusted them and gave them a chance to perform. Didn't they see the envious expressions of those god kings and domain lords who were preparing to surrender? Such a good mission and opportunity to perform, they had to grasp it well and not screw it up. With such feelings, the 3 domain leaders and the 2 clan leaders rushed into the house and flew into the night sky to carry out their mission. Under their shouts, threats, explanations, and persuasions, the 500 guards and god kings stopped panicking. They all quieted down. The 2 clan chiefs spoke the truth, saying that Kenshin Great One was here, already killing the Styx commander. All the soldiers under Mingi's command could be spared from death if they surrendered. Those who resisted would be killed without mercy. The 500 guards and a dozen god kings were filled with fear and doubt. At this time, the 3 region masters jumped out again and said with certainty that Commander Mingi was dead, Yuda's city was destined to fall, and Reincarnation Island would definitely be controlled by Kenshin. As time went by, the guards and god kings were thrown into disarray. They gradually began to believe this result. Under the coercion of the 2 clan leaders and 3 domain lords, most of the guards and divine kings chose to surrender and obediently gathered in the courtyard. However, there was a small number of stubborn people who still had hope. They tried to escape from the Golden Light Shield and returned to Netherworld Divine Palace to investigate. The 2 clan leaders and 3 domain lords acted decisively and killed those people with brute force. This shocked everyone, causing the remaining 400 guards and a dozen god kings to obediently stay in the courtyard. They didn't dare to have any other thoughts. After a while, the swearing in the study ended. In order to save time, Ji Tianqing took back the jade scroll. He directly produced a light screen and displayed the contents of the swearing to surrender. He let the domain lords and god kings read it out. Everyone could only read the swearing at the same time with different expressions and tones. The scene was quite interesting, and the atmosphere was a little strange. Fortunately, it was very efficient. In a short time, the dozen people had successfully surrendered and the Heavenly Tao Oath was established. Then, Ji Tianqing brought the surrendered domain lords and god kings out of the study and into the house. In the spacious house, the ground had cracked and the surrounding buildings had collapsed. Broken fences and walls could be seen everywhere. It was a mess. More than 480 guards and 16 god kings stood in the courtyard obediently and waited. Although everyone was mentally prepared, when they saw Kenshin appear, they were still shocked and fearful. Many people looked at Kenshin curiously, but they were intimidated by Kenshin's majestic aura and didn't dare to look directly at him. The courtyard was silent. The domain lords and god kings who had surrendered didn't dare to speak casually. Ji Tianqing took out a dozen shards of godhood and held them in his palm. They were wrapped in golden divine light and displayed for everyone to see. Don't hold on to your wishful thinking anymore. Your commander Mingi is dead. He said these words with an indifferent expression, but it was like a shocking thunderclap, shocking everyone in the field. Although everyone had expected this result. When they saw with their own eyes that Commander Mingi was only left with a dozen shards of godhood, their hearts were still filled with fear and shock. Just as Ji Tianqing said, the last trace of hope in their hearts was destroyed and dissipated. Since Commander Mingi was dead, what was the point of their stubborn resistance? Even if there were still 50,000 soldiers and more than 200 god kings in Yuda city, what was the use? It's not that we don't want to risk our lives and fight, nor is it that we are not loyal. It's just that Commander Mingi died too quickly. These thoughts flashed through everyone's minds at the same time. Thus, the 400 guards and the dozen or so god kings no longer hesitated and bowed in unison, expressing their loyalty to Ji Tianqing. The previous scene repeated itself. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and shot out a white light that condensed into a huge screen of light. It floated in the night sky and displayed a simplified version of the Oath of Surrender. The guards and god kings were already mentally prepared. Without needing Ji Tianqing to say anything, they all recited the Oath of Surrender. 100 breaths later, close to 500 people recited the Oath of Surrender. Their bodies lit up with divine light, and a trace of Tao aura appeared above their heads. In the sky above Yuda city, lightning flashed and thunder roared again. Just like that, all the guards and god kings in this house were subdued by Ji Tianqing. Next, Ji Tianqing started to give orders and assign many tasks. He first sent a message to the 5,000 soldiers stationed outside the city and ordered them to prepare for battle immediately and wait for orders to attack the south city gate of Yuda city. Then, He ordered the 2 region lords to lead 4 godly king experts to take over the control of the southern city gate. These 6 experts needed to control the south city gate and find a way to remove the poisonous fog outside the city. When the Rebel Alliance's army reached the city, they still needed to open the city gate and welcome the army in. Next, Ji Tianqing ordered more than 20 god kings and 6 region lords to rush back to the Netherworld Divine Palace immediately. Their task was very simple. They were to fabricate lies and deceive the soldiers stationed at the Netherworld Divine Palace so that they would continue to defend and not retreat. Chapter 42-54. The Netherworld Divine Palace was the core of Yuda City. There were 200 God King powerhouses there, as well as 20,000 elite soldiers. Yuda City was in chaos, and so was the Netherworld Divine Palace. Ji Tianqing was worried that some God King experts would sense that something was amiss and flee with their soldiers. Once that happened, he wouldn't be able to wipe out all the forces loyal to Commander Styx. He would have to spend a lot of time and effort to clean up those that escaped. It would be troublesome. Ji Tianqing had already thought of an excuse to deceive the soldiers of the Netherworld Divine Palace. He would say that Kenshin snuck into Yuda City to assassinate Commander Styx and was discovered in time. With the help of many guards and god kings, Commander Styx blocked Kenshin's attack and escaped from Yuda City. Kenshin chased after Commander Styx alone. However, Commander Styx was only lightly injured and had many god kings protecting him. He could also mobilize soldiers to stop Kenshin along the way, so he was safe for the time being. Furthermore, Commander Styx would circle around and try to shake off Kenshin. He would return to the Netherworld Divine Palace soon. At that time, Commander Styx would still defend the Netherworld Divine Palace and continue to fight against Kenshin. In short, he wasn't afraid of Yuda City being attacked. The Netherworld Divine Palace was the most important and couldn't be abandoned. This was the argument that Commander Styx had always emphasized. The soldiers guarding the Netherworld Divine Palace all knew about it. In order to increase his credibility, Ji Tianqing even found Commander Acheron's command token in his spatial ring. He always carried that token with him. It was very important. Seeing the token was equivalent to Commander Styx personally coming. The 10 domain lords that appeared in the house tonight were all experts that Commander Styx trusted and thought highly of. The god kings guarding the place were also the experts, generals, and commanders that Commander Styx trusted and was closest to. As long as the domain lords and god kings had Commander Styx's token, they would definitely be able to take over the Netherworld Divine Palace and control the 20,000 soldiers and god kings. After Ji Tianqing gave the order, the domain lords and deity kings bowed and said yes before leaving the courtyard to carry out their mission. Ji Tianqing did not assign any missions to the remaining guards and god kings. Instead, he took them into the world within the primordial chaos bell and took them away with him. After all, the god kings and their guards should be protecting Commander Styx from Kenshin's pursuit as he fled. For the time being, they couldn't show their faces. Otherwise, the lie would be exposed. Ji Tianqing brought the 2 patriarchs out of the house and removed the golden barrier. The 3 of them maintained their invisible state and traveled through Yuda City. After observing, they realized that Yuda City was already in chaos. Lights were everywhere, and figures were moving about. There were also countless strong practitioners flying to and fro in the night sky. The huge commotion from before had turned the entire Yuda City upside down. The ground had cracked, and the buildings had collapsed. The 1 million civilians who remained in the city were shocked. They fled in panic and shouted. Of the 30,000 soldiers guarding Yuda City, close to 10,000 were sent out to patrol and search for traces of the assassins. The 20,000 soldiers guarding the Netherworld Divine Palace strictly followed Commander Styx's orders. No matter what happened outside, they didn't let down their guard and continued to guard their posts. However, the 200 god kings in the Divine Palace were more free. Half of them flew out of the divine palace and were investigating the situation in Yuda city. After that, Ji Tianqing forced the 10 domain lords, close to 500 guards, and god kings to swear a heavenly Tao oath, which caused a phenomenon in heaven and earth. In the sky above Yuda city, shocking lightning kept exploding, and deafening thunder boomed. The terrifying might of heaven enveloped the entire Yuda city, causing everyone to be terrified. The civilians who were fleeing in panic saw that Yuda city was sealed and couldn't escape. They could only hide in their own residences. The soldiers guarding the city and patrolling guards were also playing their roles actively. They comforted the frightened civilians and quickly restored order and peace. Ji Tianqing flew in the city for a while and observed the situation in the city. He then made a decision. The situation wasn't bad. At least, there wasn't too much chaos, and there wasn't a large batch of soldiers escaping Yuda city. From this, it could be seen that the 50,000 soldiers and 200 god kings had firm wills. They were also very loyal to Commander Styx. It was also because of this that he couldn't let these people escape Yuda city. He had to plan carefully and catch them all in one fell swoop. Otherwise, if these soldiers were scattered all over Reincarnation Island, they would stir up trouble in the future. The chiefs of Hidden Dragon and Kuei tribe followed behind Ji Tianqing. After a long silence, they finally couldn't help but ask. Lord Kenshin, Commander Styx has been killed by you. Yudu city has no leader. What should we do next? Lord, I think that if we wait for Chief Song He to lead the army here, it will take a few more days. The people of Yuda city are already in a state of panic. If we delay, there might be changes. We have to attack the city as soon as possible and take control of this city. The 7,500 soldiers led by Chief Song He hadn't arrived yet. If Ji Tianqing wanted to attack Yuda city, he could only use the 5,000 soldiers outside the city. And those 5,000 soldiers were the disciples of Hidden Dragon and Kuei tribe. In other words, if Ji Tianqing did that, the merit of conquering Yuda city would belong to these two tribes. They would become the greatest contributors. The two chiefs had made such a suggestion with the intention of snatching the merit, but it was indeed in line with the actual situation. However, Ji Tianqing already had plans. He said calmly, I will let Yuan and Region Lord and the rest control the South City Gate to ensure that the city gate can be opened at any time and remove the toxic fog outside the city. Only then can we coordinate with the outside and welcome the army into the city. The 5,000 disciples of Hidden Dragon and Kuei tribe also have to be prepared at all times in case of any sudden situations. However, this is just a precautionary measure. There's still a huge risk. After all, with just 5,000 soldiers, it's impossible to control the 50,000 soldiers and 200 god kings in Yuda city. The two chiefs were speechless. They also understood that this plan wouldn't work, so they asked, since my lord already has a plan, we will naturally follow your orders. However, I wonder what my lord plans to do. Ji Tianqing revealed a playful smile and said, the main task is still to control Netherworld God Palace and stabilize the 20,000 elite soldiers and 200 god kings. The 6 region lords and 22 god kings that I will send are all strong practitioners that Commander Mingi trusts the most. They are basically the god generals and commanders that lead the army. Their statuses are extremely high. Let them stabilize the situation in Netherworld God Palace first. I will enter Netherworld God Palace secretly and control the soldiers and god kings in batches, forcing them to surrender and swear their loyalty. When the two chiefs heard this, they knew that this plan was very reliable and feasible. This method of boiling the frog in warm water could gradually control the 20,000 soldiers and 200 god kings in Netherworld God Palace. Even if there was a mistake in the middle or someone felt that something was wrong and wanted to escape, it wouldn't cause too much damage. First, they would nibble away in the dark. After controlling Netherworld God Palace, they could swallow the entire Yuda city and even the entire Reincarnation Island. Chapter 42-55. Ji Tianqing's plan to devour the whale was gradually being carried out. He brought the two chiefs to walk around Yuda city. Seeing that the region lords and divine kings were carrying out their mission seriously, quickly pacifying and suppressing the chaos in the city, Ji Tianqing was finally at ease. Around 4 to 6 hours later, dawn arrived, and a new day was about to arrive. Although the people in Yuda city were still in fear, the entire city had regained its peace. At this time, the Yuan and region lord and the rest had already taken over the south city gate and had it under their control. Ji Tianqing secretly went to the south city gate, and with the cooperation of the Yuan and region lord, he released the two tribe leaders from Yuda city. The Hidden Dragon and Kuei tribe leaders left Yuda city and returned to the army. They would personally lead their disciples and wait for Ji Tianqing's orders. Ji Tianqing stayed in Yuda city alone and continued his series of plans. He went to Yuda Divine Palace again and passed through the crack in the formation, silently entering the Divine Palace. On the other side, the region lords and over 20 divine kings also gradually took control of the entire Divine Palace. They controlled the Divine Palace where Commander Mingi usually resided. They held Commander Mingi's medallion, controlling and commanding 20,000 soldiers and 200 god kings. With their cooperation, Ji Tianqing entered the Divine Palace without any obstructions and took over Commander Mingi's residence. In this way, he wouldn't be discovered by the other divine kings if he hid in the Divine Palace. The sun rose, and a new day arrived. In the morning, the region lords and over 20 divine kings gathered close to 200 divine kings and generals under his orders to discuss matters in the meeting hall. The region lords told the generals about what happened last night, as well as Commander Mingi's whereabouts and plans. Commander Mingi escaped and shook off Kenshin's pursuit. During this period of time, they would pass on Commander Mingi's orders and command the defense of Yuda city. No matter what happened, Yuda city couldn't fall into chaos, and Yuda Divine Palace had to be strictly guarded. Nothing could go wrong. If anyone left their post or escaped, they would be executed on the spot. There was no tolerance. Most of the god kings and generals had no objections to this. Everyone was willing to hole up in Yuda city and hide in the Netherworld Divine Palace, waiting for Commander Mingi to return. However, among the many god kings, the patriarchs and elders of 4 ancient clans were extremely dissatisfied with this and raised their doubts. Their loyalty to Commander Styx was lower, their own forces were stronger, and their sense of smell was sharper. They had sensed a conspiracy and danger in this incident. They refused to believe the domain masters and the 20 or so god generals and commanders. Regarding this, the territorial leaders could only explain it in front of everyone. Seeing that the patriarchs and elders of the clans didn't listen at all and still didn't believe it, the domain masters asked them to stay and talk in detail after the meeting. Next, the territorial lords and the most powerful divine generals and commanders made some slight adjustments to the military deployment of Nether God Palace. After the meeting was over, the god kings bid farewell and left to carry out their missions. Only the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans remained in the conference hall, waiting for the territorial leaders to give a reasonable explanation. They insisted that if the territorial leaders couldn't produce sufficient evidence, they wouldn't be convinced and would refuse to listen to their orders. The best way was to find a way to get in touch with the Nether River commander and have them talk to him. The territorial leaders smiled and nodded in agreement, saying that these conditions could be fulfilled. Thus, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans remained in the conference hall, waiting for the results. However, something unexpected happened. More than 10 god generals and commanders quietly left the conference hall and activated the defensive formation of the entire Divine Palace. A total of 3 formations were activated at the same time. The outermost formation had a concealment effect, blocking all divine senses. The middle formation had a strong defense, and the innermost formation was a sealing formation that sealed the entire Divine Palace. This way, the people outside wouldn't be able to know what was happening inside the Divine Palace. Even if the patriarchs and elders of the four ancient clans were killed by the crowd, it wouldn't alarm anyone else. Sensing that the situation wasn't good, the experts of the four ancient clans were full of vigilance and immediately jumped up. They took out their divine weapons and looked at the territorial leaders and the god kings warily. They asked loudly, "What are you doing? Are you trying to silence us? I've always thought that you were a little strange. Now, it seems that there is indeed something wrong with you." The patriarchs and elders of the four clans were alert. They had long been on guard and were about to draw their swords against each other. However, the territorial leaders didn't panic at all. They smiled and said, "What's the rush? Didn't you want to see Commander Mingi? We'll let you see him immediately." The patriarchs and elders of the four ancient clans were stunned and subconsciously looked at the secret door in the corner of the conference hall. At this moment, Ji Tianqing, who was dressed in a white robe and had a dignified expression, walked out of the secret door in the corner. When he appeared, the gazes of the patriarchs and elders of the four clans immediately gathered on him. They were dumbfounded at that moment. The conference hall was silent and the atmosphere was very awkward. Even a fool would know that the white-robed youth wasn't Commander Mingi. However, the four patriarchs and elders all felt that the white-robed youth's appearance was very familiar, as if they had seen him somewhere before. After a moment of absent-mindedness, they finally remembered. That handsome, dignified, mysterious, and dignified white-robed youth should be the legendary Kenshin. The super-expert whose name shook the world and shook the god world. The peerless genius who claimed that he would unify the god world and fight against the 5 god emperors. At this moment, the 4 patriarchs and elders' legs were about to turn to jelly, and their faces were full of shock. A few elders with weaker self-control couldn't help but exclaim, "Kenshin! He's Kenshin!" The shouts of these elders were purely superfluous. The people present weren't stupid. Who didn't know that it was Kenshin? However, their exclamations made the atmosphere even heavier and more oppressive. When the 4 patriarchs and elders saw Ji Tianqing walk to the throne at the head of the table, they all subconsciously retreated. They were well aware that the entire divine palace was sealed by a great array and that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape from this divine palace. However, their instincts drove them to move away from Ji Tianqing to obtain a faint sense of security. Ji Tianqing sat down on the throne at the head of the table and looked at the 4 patriarchs and elders indifferently. "Since this lord has appeared here, I'm sure you've already guessed what's going on. If you don't want to die, obediently surrender and pledge your loyalty if you know what's good for you." These 2 simple sentences shocked everyone present. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans were speechless and their anger and killing intent dissipated. Chapter 42-56. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans were not stupid. They immediately saw through the trick and guessed the truth. Since Commander Styx had disappeared and Kenshin had appeared in this divine palace, the domain lords and the many divine kings seemed to be very respectful to Kenshin. They looked submissive and flattering. It was obvious that Kenshin had indeed infiltrated Yuda's city to assassinate Commander Styx. But the outcome was not as the domain lords had said. Commander Styx had been injured and escaped. Instead, he had been killed by Kenshin. The current situation was obvious. The domain lords and the many divine kings in the main hall had long submitted to Kenshin. They had become Kenshin's spies and controlled the Netherworld Divine Palace. Next, the other party would definitely think of a way to control the entire Netherworld Divine Palace and then Yuda City. Facing the mysterious and powerful Kenshin, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans did not have any intention of resisting. Not to mention the fact that Kenshin had the domain lords and the many divine kings beside him. Even if Kenshin was alone, they did not have the guts to attack. Even if they had 12 divine kings, they were not confident that they could defeat Kenshin alone. This was the deterrence of a peerless expert. The 4 patriarchs and elders were silent. They were silently weighing the pros and cons in their hearts. They were not willing to speak. Although they had predicted the outcome and knew that they could not resist today, they had pride and dignity. However, everyone had their own pride and backbone. Due to this problem, they didn't want to appear too weak to avoid being mocked by others. But Ji Tianqing did not have the time to slowly waste time with them. He directly released a violent divine aura that swept towards them. I will give you 10 breaths of time. If you do not surrender, you will be killed without mercy. The 4 patriarchs and elders were stunned. They immediately showed fear in their eyes. They hurriedly looked at each other and communicated with their eyes. But everyone was in despair and helplessness. No one could think of a way or come up with any ideas that could change the situation. Time passed by breath after breath. Everyone was under immense pressure. They were enduring the torment and the threat of death. Soon, the 10 breaths of time would be up. Finally, one of the patriarchs could not withstand the pressure and took the lead to lower his head to Ji Tianqing. Please calm down, Lord Kenshin. We were only loyal to Commander Styx and the god of the underworld because of the circumstances. Since Commander Mingi had already been executed, Lord Sword God had to take control of Yudu and even the entire Reincarnation Island. It was what everyone wanted. We, the Sky Heart Tribe, are willing to pledge our loyalty to Lord Kenshin and contribute to Lord Kenshin's great cause of unifying the entire Reincarnation Island. Clan head Tian Xian first explained himself to clear the relationship between the Sky Heart race and Commander Styx. Then, he expressed his respect for Kenshin and flattered him a little. No one knew exactly what he was thinking and what he was thinking. But this process had to be done. Even if he surrendered, at least it would look more dignified. After clan leader Ji Tianqing finished speaking, the other 3 clan leaders saw that he was the first to surrender and no longer had any reservations. They all expressed their loyalty to Ji Tianqing. Since the 4 clan leaders were all willing to surrender and pledge their loyalty, this matter was settled. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and threw out a jade scroll. It flew in front of the 4 clan leaders and made them read the oath of surrender one by one. He knew that the 4 patriarchs were exceptionally loyal to Commander Styx. Thus, he could not be bothered to probe their sincerity in surrendering, much less entrust them with important tasks. He only forced them to read the oath of surrender and not cause trouble in the future. The 4 clan leaders did not know what Ji Tianqing was thinking. They still thought that since they had surrendered, they had to show off in front of Kenshin no matter what. Thus, they scrambled to snatch the jade scroll and took the initiative to read the oath of surrender. The domain lords and many divine kings had seen this scene before and could guess what the 4 clan leaders were thinking. They couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Not long after, the 4 clan leaders read the oath of surrender one by one. At this moment, their bodies lit up with divine light, and Tao runes appeared above their heads. Above Yuda's city, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. Feeling the mysterious heavenly might, the 4 clan leaders kept quiet out of fear, their hearts filled with unease. Now, even if they were given 10 guts, they would not dare to disobey Kenshin's orders. But this matter was not over yet. Ji Tianqing took out a simple oath of surrender and threw it to the 8 clan leaders, asking them to read it in front of everyone. Although the 4 clan leaders could represent their clans, Ji Tianqing was not afraid of them playing tricks, they had not sworn an oath of surrender. However, the 8 elders did not swear an oath to the Tao of Heaven. If they intentionally or unintentionally leaked any information and harmed Ji Tianqing's interests, that would be unforgivable. To prevent such a thing from happening, it was more reliable to make them swear an oath. The 8 clan leaders did not expect Kenshin to target them. While they complained in their hearts, they could only obediently read the oath of surrender. They had no choice. Their clan leaders had already surrendered and pledged their loyalty. They could not possibly resist, right? Not to mention that if they resisted, it would make things difficult for the clan leaders. Just Kenshin's anger alone could easily take their lives. In order to protect themselves, it was better to obediently pledge their loyalty. Anyway, the many god kings in the hall had already sworn their oaths of surrender, so it was not embarrassing. Just like that, after a few minutes, the 8 clan leaders had all surrendered. In the sky above Yuda's city, the dull sound of thunder rang out again. The tens of thousands of guards in the city, as well as the millions of citizens, were all shocked by the mighty heavenly might and the rumbling thunder. The citizens were all anxious and secretly discussed why such a phenomenon of heaven and earth had appeared again. Such a phenomenon appeared last night, and it was said that Kenshin had come to assassinate Commander Styx. Why did it appear again today? Could it be that Kenshin was still in Yuda's city? Was he still fighting with Commander Styx? That was impossible. If that was the case, Yuda's city would not be so peaceful. It would have been destroyed by the aftermath of the battle between the two experts. Therefore, some citizens guessed that Kenshin was the favored child of the heavens, the embodiment of justice, representing the heavenly Tao to protect the order of the god world. This should be the tyranny of Commander Styx and the god of the underworld, which angered the heavens, so such a lightning punishment was sent down, right? The citizens discussed fervently, and there were all kinds of strange theories. Fortunately, there were many experts and guards in the city, so the city could still maintain its peace and did not become chaotic. Not long after, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans left the discussion hall with normal expressions. The 3 god formations of the god palace were also closed, and everything returned to normal. Some of the guards and soldiers outside, even if they had some doubts, did not dare to casually discuss or ask. Even if there were some generals who asked the 4 clan leaders what had happened previously. The 4 clan leaders and the 8 clan leaders also said that they had received a message from Commander Styx in the hall, and they had to keep it a secret before activating the defensive formation. This explanation was still reasonable, and it deceived all the guards and soldiers. The 4 clan leaders and the clan leaders under them returned to their respective posts and continued to carry out their missions like before, without any abnormalities. In the evening, more than 10 God King experts were ordered to rush to the meeting hall to accept a mission. Clearly, Ji Tianqing had started to nibble away at the 200 God Kings in the Netherworld God Palace. Book House Reading Website. Chapter 42-57. The 4 clan leaders and 8 elders of the first batch did not show any abnormalities. The 20,000 soldiers and god kings of the Netherworld God Palace naturally did not notice anything, let alone expect Kenshin to be there. Therefore, the 18 god kings of the second batch received a secret order from the territorial lords and knew that there was a top-secret mission for them. They entered the meeting hall without any precaution. What happened next was similar to what happened before. The triple divine formation was activated again and enveloped the entire divine palace, isolating it from the outside world's divine consciousness. No one knew what happened in the divine palace. Only the territorial lords and a dozen god kings stayed in the main hall to witness the entire process. The divine palace's defensive formation was only deactivated after about an hour. 16 god kings left the main hall one after another and returned to their posts with calm expressions. There did not seem to be anything out of the ordinary. The soldiers outside the divine palace did not know what they had experienced at all. They did not know why only 16 of them came out of the 18 who went in. Even the soldiers and god kings who were familiar with them could not get any answers when they asked the 16 people. They all used the reason of confidentiality and refused to reveal any information. Just like that, the second batch of god kings was forced to submit and swear allegiance to Ji Tianqing. The 2 stubborn god kings, who would rather die than submit, died just as they wished and joined Commander Styx in death. As time passed, in the next 2 days, the territorial lords summoned the remaining 170 god kings 10 times. Every time a god king was summoned and entered the divine palace, the triple divine formation would be activated. Most of the 10 batches of god kings left unscathed. Only a handful of god kings disappeared mysteriously and never appeared again. The god kings who left unscathed did what they were supposed to do as usual. There was nothing out of the ordinary. However, they did not talk about the details of the top-secret mission. After the same thing happened several times, the soldiers stationed in the Netherworld God Palace sensed that the atmosphere was strange. Something was not right. However, the 20,000 soldiers were suspicious and discussed in private, but they could not say anything. They plucked up their courage and tried their best to beat around the bush with the many God Kings, but they could not get a direct answer. As a result, the 20,000 soldiers were once again filled with anxiety. It seemed that the Netherworld Divine Palace was starting to become restless. The 20,000 soldiers might mutiny and defect. At this time, the experts led by several domain lords issued an edict in the name of Commander Mingi. They gathered 20,000 soldiers and announced a major event. In order to ensure that this top-secret information would not be leaked, they had to activate the defensive formation of the Netherworld Divine Palace. In addition, the 20,000 soldiers had to temporarily leave the sentry post and gather at the square. This strange order came at the right time. At the very least, the 20,000 soldiers knew that the questions in their hearts would soon be answered. Therefore, the soldiers left their posts and rushed to the square in the middle of the Divine Palace. The square with a radius of 10,000 feet was large enough to accommodate 20,000 soldiers. They lined up in the square according to different forces and formations. Close to 100 Divine King powerhouses surrounded the plaza, waiting patiently. There were also dozens of God Kings who went to activate the defensive array of the Netherworld Divine Palace. Swoosh! Swish! Not long after, divine light soared into the sky from all directions, forming a huge screen of light. Soon, all the formations within a radius of 15 miles were activated, forming a semicircular blood-colored screen of light that sealed the entire Netherworld Divine Palace. The blood-colored screen of light blocked out divine consciousness. Everything that happened in the Divine Palace could not be detected by the outside world. Seeing this, the 20,000 soldiers on the square immediately panicked and worried. Many of them had a bad premonition. Fortunately, the domain lords led many divine generals and commanders to appear above the square in time, attracting everyone's attention. These domain masters, divine generals, and commanders were the strongest, most powerful experts under Commander Mingi's command. In other words, they were also the core leaders of Yuta City and the tens of thousands of soldiers. Since they had appeared, the 20,000 soldiers waited patiently to see what they were going to announce and how they were going to explain it. However, what happened next left the 20,000 soldiers dumbfounded. The domain lords looked at the 20,000 soldiers with faint smiles on their faces. Someone directly announced a piece of news. 2 days ago, the famous Lord Kenshin did indeed sneak into Yuta City to assassinate Commander Mingi. Commander Mingi had expected this day to come, so he was not in the Netherworld Divine Palace. He led many guards and powerhouses to hide in a house in the southern part of the city. He originally wanted to escape from Yuta City in the chaos when Kenshin attacked the Netherworld Divine Palace, abandoning all his soldiers. Unfortunately, the wise and mighty Lord Kenshin still found him and killed him easily with lightning speed. Upon hearing this shocking news, the 20,000 soldiers were dumbfounded and petrified on the spot. Such an earth-shattering change caused everyone to be extremely shocked, and their minds went blank. After a long while, the 20,000 soldiers came back to their senses and immediately burst into chaotic cries and shouts. Only then did they understand that the domain lords and godly king powerhouses had been acting for the past 2 days. It turned out that the rumors of Commander Mingi escaping from Kenshin's pursuit were all fake. There was also a portion of soldiers who did not believe this sensational news. They firmly believed that Commander Mingi would not be killed so easily. However, the 100-odd godly king powerhouses around the square all remained silent with indifferent expressions. It was obvious that they had known about this news long ago and had accepted this result. At this moment, the Grand Commander of the Forbidden Army stood up and said to the soldiers, "Everyone, there is no need to doubt. Commander Mingi has indeed fallen. Lord Kenshin also did not leave Yuda's city and has always been in the Netherworld Divine Palace. In these 2 days, Lord Kenshin summoned all the godly king powerhouses in batches and told everyone this result. We have all been influenced by Lord Kenshin's righteousness and dignity and have all turned over to the light, swearing loyalty to Lord Kenshin. Even if there were a few stubborn ones, they have already been punished by the heavens and turned into ashes. The vice-commander of the Forbidden Army also took 2 steps forward and added, "Previously, weren't you all puzzled as to why there was always lightning in the sky above Yuda's city? To tell everyone the truth, that is because we swore an oath to the heavenly Tao and caused this phenomenon." Finally, a highly respected domain lord said to the soldiers, "The general trend cannot be defied, and the will of the heavens cannot be defied. Lord Kenshin is the embodiment of justice, the messenger of the heavens, and has come to save Reincarnation Island. You all only have 2 choices now, either admit defeat and sincerely repent, or be punished by the heavens and die." Chapter 42-58. Previously, when Ji Tianqing forced the various territorial lords and divine kings to surrender, he also said the same thing, appearing particularly domineering, overbearing, and majestic. At this moment, when that old grizzled territorial lord said these words, although it was a little like a fox exploiting the tiger's might, it also felt very comfortable and was exceptionally proud in his heart. Under the suppression of the powerful aura, the 20,000 soldiers were in an uproar, all panicked and uneasy, at a loss on what to do. The surrounding 100 over divine king powerhouses were all their immediate superiors, or clan heads, commanders, generals, and so on. Even their leader swore an oath of surrender to Kenshin. Did they, these divine lord realm small fries, still have the qualifications to resist? The outcome was of course without suspense. Many of the soldiers were already mentally prepared to surrender in their hearts. Firstly, their strength was meager and could not resist on the spot. Otherwise, it would be a dead end. Without needing Kenshin to make a move, just based on the 100 over divine king powerhouses in the field, they could kill all 20,000 soldiers. Secondly, their leader already surrendered to Kenshin and pledged loyalty. They could not betray their own forces. The various divine kings did not feel ashamed. These divine lord realm small fries, naturally did not care about any face even more. Hence, after the 20,000 soldiers were in chaos and clamor for a while, they all reached a consensus to admit defeat and surrender. It was also at this time that Ji Tianqing finally appeared. He walked out of the divine palace and crossed a distance of 10,000 feet in 4 steps, arriving right above the square, overlooking everyone present. Even though he did not open his mouth to speak, nor did he release a powerful pressure. But his entire body carried an aura that suppressed heaven and earth, an unparalleled sacred domineering aura, immediately making the entire square quiet down. With those few territorial lords in the lead, 190 divine king powerhouses all bowed and saluted Ji Tianqing in unison. The 20,000 soldiers were stunned on the spot, all awed by Ji Tianqing's aura. Each and every one of them revealed reverence and fear, not daring to make a sound. Seeing this scene, the few territorial lords hurriedly berated those soldiers. "Are all of you dumb? Seeing Lord Kenshin arrive, still not quickly saluting? What are you all in a daze for? Quickly salute and pay respects to Lord Kenshin." After being reprimanded by the domain lords, the soldiers came back to their senses and hurriedly bowed. However, 20,000 people were too many, and there was no tacit understanding between them. The scene was very chaotic and noisy. The region masters, god kings, and generals all blushed at this unsightly sight. They were so ashamed that they wanted to crawl into a hole. These were the elite soldiers under their command. For them to perform in such an unsightly manner was a disgrace to them. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing did not mind this. He calmly waved his hand and shot out a white light, which condensed into a huge white light screen in the sky. A large number of golden words appeared on the white light screen, showing a simplified version of the surrender oath of about 300 words. There was no need for Ji Tianqing to explain anything. Everyone understood that the 20,000 soldiers had to swear this oath to the heavenly Tao before they could be considered to have surrendered and pledged their loyalty. A familiar scene appeared once again. The 20,000 soldiers carefully read the oath of the heavenly Tao on the light screen. The more they read, the paler their faces became, and the more frightened they became. The oath's content was harsh and complicated. It was truly unprecedented and made one's scalp tingle. In the past, many soldiers had heard that when Kenshin ruled the boundless heaven continent, he made a terrifying oath of the heavenly Tao. The content was very frightening. Everyone thought that it was just forcing the enemy to swear an oath of surrender. It was nothing more than using their lives as a threat. What was there to be afraid of? But now, everyone saw the content of the oath with their own eyes. Only then did they know that the frightening thing was not the consequences of violating the oath. Instead, this oath of the heavenly Tao was very detailed. It took into account all the possibilities that the swearer could harm Kenshin's interests and threaten Kenshin's safety. In other words, as long as they made this oath of the heavenly Tao, even if the soldiers did not mean what they said and secretly talked about Kenshin, it was not allowed. Even if they had disrespectful or hateful thoughts toward Kenshin, directly or indirectly harmed Kenshin's interests, or passively treated Kenshin's orders, they would be punished by the heavens. But anyone who made the oath of the heavenly Tao must be loyal to Kenshin wholeheartedly. Otherwise, they would be reduced to ashes. The 20,000 soldiers suddenly understood. No wonder those 190 divine kings, their leaders were all so obedient and were very respectful toward Kenshin. It turned out that it was all the effect of the oath of the heavenly Tao. The plaza experienced a brief silence. Some soldiers with stronger mental fortitude began to recite the oath of surrender. The other soldiers came back to their senses. They were afraid that they would show too much hesitation and resistance, and be killed on the spot as a warning to others. Therefore, they did not hesitate anymore and hurriedly recited the oath loudly. The plaza immediately became lively, clamorous, and a boiling cauldron of voices. The order in which the 20,000 soldiers recited the oath was different. Their voices were either loud or soft and were not uniform. Just by listening to the voices, it was very hard to distinguish who recited the oath and who muddled through. But one thing was very obvious. They could clearly distinguish who was reciting the oath of the heavenly Tao. That was, when the oath of the heavenly Tao was recited halfway, divine light would light up all over the person reciting it. Tao rhymes would appear above their heads. This was the most obvious mark. There was no need for Ji Tianqing to supervise and check. The 190 divine king experts consciously carried out their duty of supervision. Even though 99% of the soldiers were very honest, there were still a dozen or so soldiers who played tricks. They pretended to be reciting the oath, but in reality, they were spouting nonsense. A few divine king experts pulled those people out and killed them on the spot. Their methods were even more ruthless than Ji Tianqing's. This action indeed intimidated all the soldiers, causing them to be filled with fear. No one dared to play tricks anymore. Even those who spoke slowly were so frightened that they hurriedly sped up and finished reciting the oath of surrender as soon as possible. Even so, it took a full 15 minutes for the 20,000 soldiers to recite the oath of surrender one after another. Everyone was enveloped by divine light, and a wisp of faintly discernible Tao rhymes appeared above their heads. In the sky above Yuda's city, thunderbolts that covered the sky and earth appeared again. They flashed and boomed continuously. Yuda's city, which was almost drowned by the lightning in the sky, fell into panic once again. The million citizens were on tenterhooks as they discussed quietly. The 30,000 soldiers guarding the city still didn't know what was going on. They were also very flustered and worried, and they all sent messages to the god generals to report. Those soldiers guarding the city would never have thought that their generals had long pledged their loyalty to the Kenshin. Hence, The reply that the 30,000 soldiers received was also very easy to guess. Naturally, it was for them to remain calm and not panic. When the soldiers guarding the city received the reply, they were still skeptical. However, there was nothing they could do. They could only stick to their posts. Not long later, the 20,000 soldiers of the Netherworld Divine Palace had all surrendered. The entire Netherworld Divine Palace had completely fallen into Ji Tianqing's control. He also appeared openly and didn't need to hide anymore. At this point, the plan to swallow the whale was more than half completed. As long as he subdued the 30,000 soldiers guarding the city, it would be over. Chapter 42-59. Not only did Ji Tianqing control the Netherworld God Palace, but he also subdued 20,000 soldiers. The 18 domain lords, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans, the commanders of the imperial guards, and the inspector of the city guards were all under his command. In this way, all of the mainstays under Commander Mingi's command were taken care of in one fell swoop. Just as the Netherworld God Palace regained its peace, Ji Tianqing received a message from clan head Song He. As it turned out, the 7,500 soldiers led by clan head Song He had finally arrived outside Yuta City and met up with the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan. Since the 5 clans under the Rebel Alliance were all here, Ji Tianqing didn't waste any more time and prepared to completely occupy Yuta City. He first sent 6 region lords and 30 God King experts to take over the east, west, and north city gates of Yuta City. Within 2 hours, the 36 experts completed their missions. In this way, the 4 city gates of Yuta City were all under Ji Tianqing's control. He then sent a message to the 5 clan heads of Song He, Hidden Dragon Clan, and Kuei Clan. He ordered them to split into 2 groups and enter the south and east city gates respectively. In any case, the people guarding the city gates were their own people, so the disciples of the 5 clans could enter directly. After entering Yuta City, they only had one goal, and that was to control the soldiers guarding the 2 city gates as soon as possible. After the 5 clan heads received the order, they immediately started their preparations. Ji Tianqing also sent out the commander of the royal guards and a god general to lead over a dozen god kings and close to 10,000 soldiers to the north and west city gates respectively. Their mission was to control the soldiers guarding the 2 city gates. Other than that, Ji Tianqing also asked the city guard's governor to lead over 3,000 soldiers to control the city protection formation. Ji Tianqing only had one request for the various armies, and that was to control the 30,000 soldiers guarding the city. None of them could escape. The various god kings and soldiers received the order and immediately took action. Next, an inconceivable scene appeared in the seemingly calm Yuta City. At the southern and eastern city gates, the armies of the Sword God Subjugation Alliance were marching toward the 2 gates in a majestic manner. The soldiers guarding the city gates didn't stop or kill them. Instead, they quickly opened the city gates and welcomed the 2 armies into the city. This scene dumbfounded the guards near the 2 city gates. This was especially true for the soldiers stationed on the city walls and patrolling in the sky. They were so shocked that they almost fell to the ground. However, an even more preposterous scene occurred. After the 2 armies of the Rebel Alliance entered the city, the God King experts and soldiers guarding the city gates actually joined forces with the enemy and captured the soldiers guarding the city gates. The soldiers guarding the city couldn't react and they couldn't accept this fact. They couldn't believe that their generals and brothers were actually allied with the enemy. What's wrong with this world? Isn't this too ridiculous? There was no need to doubt the outcome. Those soldiers guarding the city who were in a daze were captured and obediently surrendered. What was even more hilarious was that the God King experts guarding the city gates didn't even need to do anything. They just needed to give an order and those soldiers guarding the city gates surrendered. Of course, there were also a small number of soldiers guarding the city who were very unyielding or very loyal to Commander Mingi. When they sensed that the Yuta city had changed hands, they would rather die than submit. They even wanted to self-destruct and perish together with the traitors. This was all within the expectations of the God King experts. They promptly took action and used their lightning-fast methods to extinguish the flames of self-destruction. They didn't cause any damage. The same scene was playing out at the west and north city gates of the Yuda city. When the soldiers guarding the city saw the Forbidden Army commander and the city guard army supervisor bringing thousands of soldiers to the vicinity of the city gates, they were very surprised and curious. Of course, they could recognize that the thousands of soldiers were the elite soldiers guarding the Netherworld God Palace. Most of them were Forbidden Army soldiers. In other words, those soldiers were even more elite than the soldiers guarding the city. Their statuses were also slightly higher. It was really strange. What were the Forbidden Army soldiers doing at the city gates instead of guarding the Netherworld God Palace? After that, the Forbidden Army commander and the city guard army supervisor ordered the soldiers guarding the city to surrender. This baffling order caused the soldiers guarding the city to be at a loss. They couldn't make heads or tails of it. However, many of the soldiers guarding the city instinctively put away their weapons and assumed a posture of surrender. As for those soldiers guarding the city who had yet to react, they were still whispering to each other or asking each other what was going on. The Forbidden Army commander and the city guard army supervisor didn't waste any time. They immediately ordered the elite soldiers under their command to surround the soldiers guarding the city and capture them on the spot. A small number of soldiers guarding the city realized that the situation wasn't good and hurriedly turned to flee. However, the Great City Protecting Formation had always been activated. Moreover, it was controlled by someone to seal off the Yuda city, making it impossible to enter or leave. Those God Lord Realm soldiers guarding the city naturally couldn't break through the Great City Protecting Formation. They were quickly captured. What happened next was logical. When the conditions were right, success was achieved naturally. The various armies used the 4 city gates as the center and started to search the center of Yuda city. They captured all the soldiers guarding the city and patrolling guards along the way. 4 hours later, the various armies brought close to 30,000 captives and gathered at the plaza in the center of the city. That plaza with a radius of 30,000 feet was enough to accommodate over 100,000 people. At this moment, the 20,000 soldiers under Ji Tianqing's command escorted close to 30,000 soldiers guarding the city. They didn't feel crowded when they gathered at the plaza. Even though the soldiers guarding the city felt wronged and puzzled, they didn't dare to make a ruckus under the heavy atmosphere. They could only discuss in secret and ask what was going on. In addition, there were also 3,000 soldiers searching for the soldiers guarding the city and patrolling guards in Yuda city. After all, there were only 29,200 people that were captured on the plaza. There were still over 700 soldiers that weren't captured. The commoners of Yuda city also discovered the drastic change in the city. They were filled with doubts and couldn't make heads or tails of it. In their eyes, the 5 families of the Rebel Alliance had killed their way into Yuda city, which meant that the Kenshin had also come. It should have been a chaotic situation. In the end, not only did the soldiers guarding Yuda city not deal with the Rebel Alliance's army, they even joined forces with the Rebel Alliance to capture the soldiers guarding the city. Helping the enemy to capture their own people. What was this called? The commoners of Yuda city were still slightly different from the commoners of Reincarnation Island. The commoners that lived in this city were all either rich or noble. The soldiers under Commander Mingi and Marshal Blood Prison had many descendants and branches over the past 1,000 years. There were also many relatives and so on. In short, the commoners of this city were even more loyal to Commander Mingi and the god of the underworld. They weren't like the commoners of Reincarnation Island who welcomed the Kenshin to save Reincarnation Island. On the contrary, they would rather the Kenshin be defeated and Yuda city and Reincarnation Island maintain the status quo. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4260. Of course, no matter how much the citizens of Yuta City didn't welcome the Kenshin, they didn't have the guts to unite and resist. They could only watch in the dark and observe the changes. After all, many of the citizens were nobles and had heard some news from various sources. Although they didn't know the truth, they could guess that Commander Styx had died long ago with their sharp senses. Since the Kenshin had already taken control of the situation, it was only a matter of time before they took over Yuta City and Reincarnation Island. They were powerless to change the outcome, so they could only accept it silently. Unknowingly, another 4 hours passed. The 3,000 elite soldiers searched around Yuta City twice and finally captured the remaining 700+ soldiers and patrolling guards. When these soldiers were brought to the plaza in the city, the 30,000 soldiers were finally gathered. The more than 20,000 captives who had been waiting in the square had long been exhausted and tortured. Waiting in the unknown was the scariest, especially when they didn't know what their fate would be. At first, they were uneasy, but as they let their imaginations run wild, they were filled with fear. Now that the 30,000 soldiers were gathered, they guessed that the time to decide their fate had arrived, right? As expected. The Imperial Army Commander, Vice Commander, and City Guard Inspector began to speak. It was still the same speech as before, telling the soldiers that Commander Styx had already been killed by the Kenshin. Now, the 20,000 elite soldiers and close to 200 God King experts had already surrendered to the Kenshin. These 30,000 soldiers had to surrender to the Kenshin and swear their loyalty. Otherwise, they would be executed on the spot. Not to mention that the threat of death made the soldiers fearful and choose to surrender without hesitation. Their immediate superior, the numerous generals and city guard supervisor, had already surrendered to the Kenshin. What reason did they have to defend Yuta City? Commander Styx had already died, and their generals had also betrayed and surrendered. What loyalty did they have to talk about? The outcome was destined. The 30,000 soldiers didn't hesitate and immediately expressed their willingness to surrender. Therefore, Ji Tianqing appeared at the most appropriate time. With a dignified expression, he stepped across the sky and arrived above the plaza in the middle of the city. The 30,000 soldiers guarding the city had never seen Kenshin's true appearance, but they were well aware of Kenshin's powerful means. They were all fearful and uneasy. Ji Tianqing didn't waste time talking nonsense with the city guards. He waved his hand and projected a light screen, displaying a simplified version of the Pledge of Surrender. Under the orders and urging of the Imperial Army Commander and the City Guard Supervisor, the 30,000 soldiers could only brace themselves and recite the terrifying oath to the heavenly Tao. Not long after, 5-colored divine light resounded in the square, and a large amount of Taoist rhymes appeared. The sky above Yuta City was once again covered by boundless lightning, and the world-shaking roars of thunder rang out incessantly. Such a terrifying apparition of heaven and earth caused the entire Yuta City to tremble non-stop. These 30,000 soldiers were exceptionally obedient. After all, they were being watched by over 100 god kings and surrounded by an army of over 20,000. No one dared to play any tricks. After a long while, the heaven and earth anomaly caused by the oath of the 30,000 soldiers finally ended. Yuta City gradually calmed down. At this point, Ji Tianqing's plan was 80% complete, and Yuta City was completely under his control. The 50,000 soldiers that originally belonged to Mingi and the 12,000 people from the 5 families had all become his soldiers. These 60,000 soldiers were the strongest force on Reincarnation Island, and they were enough to change the situation of the entire Reincarnation Island. After the 30,000 soldiers finished their oath, Ji Tianqing ordered for the defensive formation of Yuta City to be shut down and the 4 city gates to be opened. From this moment onwards, Yuta City was officially unsealed. Over 60,000 soldiers were split into over 30 groups, and they were scattered all over Yuta City. Ji Tianqing brought the 200 God King experts back to Netherworld Divine Palace and held a meeting in the conference hall. Of course, although it was called a meeting, it was actually Ji Tianqing who gave the orders, and the various domain lords, generals, and experts just had to carry it out. This was because Ji Tianqing already had a well-thought-out plan for the follow-up plans and plans. When the various God King experts lined up neatly in the conference hall, the meeting officially began. Ji Tianqing's first order was to announce the news. He wanted everyone on Reincarnation Island to know that Mingyi was dead and that the god of the underworld had no time to care about Reincarnation Island. Now that Kenshin had led his army to conquer Yuda's city and subdued all the soldiers and the 18 domain lords, he had complete control of Reincarnation Island. Although the news would soon spread throughout the Reincarnation Island through various channels, the news would soon spread throughout the island. However, such a serious and solemn matter had to be officially announced to show its authority. The second order was to remove the defense of Yuda's city and return to normal. The 18 domain lords also had to bring their soldiers back to their respective domain lord manors to maintain order in their territories and calm the chaos. After all, in the past half a month, the 18 domains had been in chaos and chaos. The most important thing now was to restore peace to Reincarnation Island. The third order was one of the objectives of Ji Tianqing's attack on Reincarnation Island. This order was also given to the 18 domain lords. After they returned to their respective territories and calmed the chaos, they had to restore the freedom of the people as quickly as possible. The slavery system that had been practiced on Reincarnation Island for thousands of years was officially abolished. Whether it was the god race or the other races, they would regain their freedom from now on. They would no longer be slaves to the god of the underworld. In addition, all the statues of the god of the underworld, Mingyi, and the Blood Helm Marshal on Reincarnation Island had to be destroyed as soon as possible. After announcing these three major events, Ji Tianqing issued a series of orders to deal with all the small matters in an orderly manner. This included the 4 ancient clans that had been loyal to Commander Mingyi and had only surrendered 2 days ago. They had also received appropriate arrangements. Ji Tianqing didn't punish them, but he didn't reward them either. For the 4 ancient clans, it was already a blessing that they could keep their lives and their eternal legacy. As Ji Tianqing announced the various orders, the domain lords, generals, and god kings that were named bowed and accepted the orders. At this point, the Pine Crane clan, Hidden Dragon clan, Kuei clan, Fong clan, and Quicksand clan all felt somewhat disappointed and regretful. They finally understood that Kenshin didn't intend to choose a new domain lord. Instead, he would continue to appoint the 18 domain lords. After all, the 18 domain lords had already sworn their loyalty. As long as they didn't want to die, they wouldn't betray Kenshin. As for the 5 ancient clans, they had risked their lives to fight for the position of domain lord. At this moment, Ji Tianqing announced one last thing. That was, the first 5 ancient clans to join the anti-rebel alliance would be rewarded based on their contributions. He took out the resources and treasures that he had prepared long ago. They were worth nearly 100 trillion gold coins and used them to reward the 5 ancient clans. The people of the 5 ancient clans were instantly stunned by the huge surprise. Translator, Timothy_editor, Globeglotter. Chapter 4261. The 5 ancient clans were a little disappointed just now. Now that they knew that Ji Tianqing had taken out 100 trillion worth of resources and treasures to reward them, they were extremely excited. Even if it was evenly distributed, each ancient clan would be able to get 20 trillion worth of cultivation resources. This number was already comparable to the value of each ancient clan's treasure vault. With this reward, their assets and wealth would double, and their strength and foundation would be even more abundant. Moreover, after this huge surprise, Ji Tianqing added another reward. That was, he would take out 20 more divine abilities and secret techniques to reward the 5 ancient clans. Hearing this news, the 5 ancient clans were even more excited. They knew that the divine abilities and secret techniques that Kenshin took out were definitely high-end and precious divine abilities. They either had miraculous effects or were extremely powerful. If an ordinary person could obtain one or two of them, it would already be a great harvest. If each ancient clan could obtain 20 divine abilities and secret techniques, their power would definitely grow even stronger. In the future, these 5 ancient clans would definitely be the strongest on Reincarnation Island. No one would be able to compete with them. Ji Tianqing took out 10 interspatial rings and gave them to the 5 patriarchs of the ancient clans. Each clan received 2 interspatial rings that contained different amounts of cultivation resources and treasures. There were also jade slips that recorded the 20 divine abilities. Since it was a reward based on merit, the resources and wealth that each clan received were different. The Feng clan and the Quicksand clan received the least rewards. They only received 15 trillion worth of cultivation resources. The clan that received the most rewards was undoubtedly the Pine Crane clan. The cultivation resources they received were worth 30 trillion. As for the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, they were in the middle. They received 20 trillion worth of resources. Of course, Ji Tianqing's additional 20 divine abilities and secret techniques were the same for all 5 ancient clans. There was no difference in this. The value of these 20 divine abilities and secret techniques was immeasurable. There was no need to give a corresponding value. The 5 ancient clan leaders received their rewards happily. They bowed again and again to express their gratitude to Ji Tianqing. The other god kings, generals, and domain lords in the hall were filled with envy and jealousy when they saw the 5 ancient clans receive such great rewards. Finally, Ji Tianqing announced the most important task, which could be considered a reward for the 5 ancient clans. That was, the Pine Crane clan would act as the Vice Alliance leader of the Rebel Alliance's Reincarnation Island branch. When he wasn't on Reincarnation Island, he would have full authority to handle all matters on Reincarnation Island. The other 4 ancient clans would form a monitoring group to assist the Pine Crane clan in managing the Reincarnation Island and supervising the Pine Crane clan. This way, when Ji Tianqing wasn't on Reincarnation Island, the 5 ancient clans would be the ones in control. Among the 5 clans, the Pine Crane clan was the most respected. Of course, in order to ensure that the Pine Crane race did not become too powerful, the other 4 ancient clans had the responsibility to supervise them. The domain lords of the 18 domains were also qualified to send jade slips to Ji Tianqing to report matters directly. When Ji Tianqing announced this task, the hall was in an uproar. Countless people cried out in surprise, revealing excited and envious expressions. This was especially so for the people of the 5 ancient clans. Their hearts raced, and their blood boiled. Many people were so excited that they danced with joy. Compared to the 100 trillion cultivation resources, this reward was obviously more shocking. It made the 5 ancient clans excited and exhilarated. After a while, everyone gradually calmed down. The patriarchs of the 5 ancient clans hurriedly kowtowed to Ji Tianqing to express their obedience and gratitude. The meeting ended just like that. The god kings, generals, and domain lords all bowed and left the hall. Next, Ji Tianqing oversaw Yuta city and stayed in the Netherworld Divine Palace, waiting for the situation on Reincarnation Island to settle down. As for the generals, domain lords, and god kings, they would return to their respective territories and rush to their respective posts to carry out their missions. Of course, before the 18 domain lords left, they met Ji Tianqing again to ask him how to open the seal formation of the domain lord manor. After all, the domain lord manors of the 18 domains had been cleared out by the Rebel Alliance and sealed with a formation. The domain lords had different thoughts about the seal formation set up by Ji Tianqing. Only a small number of them hoped that Kenshin could remove the seal formation and allow them to enter and leave freely. However, most of the domain lords did not think so. Instead, they felt that keeping the seal formation would give their domain lord manor an additional layer of protection, and they would feel more at ease. After all, the seal formation set up by Kenshin was very close to a supreme grade king level divine formation. It was stronger than the original defensive formation of the Domain Lord Manor. As long as Kenshin told them how to open the formation, they could still enter and leave without much impact. After all, they had already made the heavenly oath and pledged their loyalty to Kenshin. They would not have any other thoughts. The final result was in line with most of the Domain Lord's expectations. Ji Tianqing did not intend to remove the seal formation of the various Domain Lord manors. He only told the Domain Lords how to open the formation. After all, he did not want to waste any more time to remove the formations one by one. When the region masters received the method to activate the Great Formation, they left Yudu with hearts full of joy. They brought the soldiers under their command back to their own territories. One day later, Kenshin officially announced that he had taken over the entire Reincarnation Island. The news quickly spread throughout the entire Reincarnation Island, and countless forces and empires learned about it. In just a few days, the news spread throughout the Reincarnation Island, and hundreds of millions of people learned about the good news. Instantly, the entire Reincarnation Island fell into great shock and joy. Although many experts and forces were mentally prepared, they knew that Commander Mingi was defeated and that Kenshin was destined to take over the Reincarnation Island. However, no one expected that this day would come so quickly. Moreover, the process was very simple, easy, and smooth. There was no large-scale battle that affected the entire Reincarnation Island. It seemed that the battle was limited to Yuta City and ended quickly. From this, it could be seen that the rebel alliance led by Kenshin would be crushed easily by the soldiers under Commander Mingi's command. No one knew that the two armies did not actually fight at all. Kenshin only assassinated Commander Mingi and then gradually took over Yuta City. The process was easier, smoother, and faster than the people had imagined. However, no matter what, hundreds of millions of people were still jubilant and excited. They discussed this matter excitedly and cheered for Kenshin. After all, after the 18 Domain Lords returned to their respective territories, they quickly began to implement the new policies. The first order they carried out was to abolish slavery and restore freedom to all the people. This was the magnificent feat that hundreds of millions of people looked forward to the most. Chapter 42-62. Day after day passed, and the situation on Reincarnation Island quickly stabilized. Of course, the entire Reincarnation Island was in a state of excitement and celebration. It would probably take a long time for it to calm down. After all, Reincarnation Island had a new master, and Ji Tianqing had issued a series of new policies and orders. The 18 Domain Lords and many ancient clans, as well as the commanders and leaders of various forces, were ordered to carry out various tasks and carry out reforms. The biggest beneficiaries were naturally the billions of people. They were excited and emotional, and they worshipped Kenshin to the extreme. After the situation stabilized, countless people gathered spontaneously and destroyed the statues of the god of the underworld in various cities. Even the statues of Commander Styx and Marshal Blood Prison were destroyed into dregs. Then, the people spontaneously built Kenshin pavilions and erected beautiful and majestic statues of Kenshin for everyone to worship. In the past, the people were oppressed. Many of the people of other races were slaves who had to work all day long to mine and seize cultivation resources. They had no freedom. Every once in a while, they had to worship the statues of the god of the underworld and pray. All of this was forced. Everyone's hearts were filled with disgust and resistance. Therefore, when destroying the statues of the god of the underworld, the people worked harder than anyone else. They built Kenshin pavilions and erected Kenshin statues of their own free will. That came from the bottom of their hearts. They were truly grateful to the Sword God for saving them and giving them freedom and peace. Even if they went to Kenshin pavilions and worshipped Kenshin, it was out of their own free will and sincerity. There was absolutely no coercion. In this way, the billions of people's worship, gratitude, and faith toward Kenshin were the most sincere and strongest. Ji Tianqing had always been overseeing the Netherworld Divine Palace in Yudu and didn't personally check the situation on Reincarnation Island. However, he could sense every day that Kenshin pavilions were built one after another. Countless people worshipped and expressed their respect, worship, and gratitude toward him. It was a very mysterious feeling. The feelings of respect and worship of all living beings gathered into an invisible power of faith. It was transformed by the heavenly Tao and transmitted to Ji Tianqing. Under the support of the power of faith, he did nothing every day and his strength steadily increased. Of course, this wasn't the first time this had happened. Half a year ago, after he saved the boundless heaven continent, this situation occurred. In this half a year, even if he wasn't in the continent, he could sense that the people there worshipped his statues every day. His strength was also constantly increasing. There was no limit, and there was no bottleneck. This was also the reason why the 5 great god emperors had forced the common people to build divine statues and worship them after they had taken over the god realm. This was because this method of increasing one's strength was indeed much faster and easier than cultivating. A month passed in the blink of an eye. 80 to 90% of the various decrees and policies. The Reincarnation Islands gradually calmed down. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. The Reincarnation Island, which had not been ravaged by war, looked no different from before. However, there was one difference that was very obvious. The Reincarnation Island today was full of joy, relaxation, and freedom. Whether it was in the bustling city, the streets, or the countryside, the people were all smiling. They felt happy from the bottom of their hearts. In the past 1,000 years, there were many slaves working in countless mines, herb mountains, beast gardens, and other places where resources were plundered. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive. Now, all the slaves were gone. They were restored to the status of commoners, gaining freedom and a new life. The places where resources were plundered were controlled by the domain chiefs' manors, the empires, and many forces under their control. They carried out controlled, planned, and arranged mining. Ji Tianqing understood that abolishing slavery and stopping the plundering of cultivation resources couldn't be overdone. Since hundreds of millions of people wanted to cultivate, the mining of cultivation resources still had to be carried out. Otherwise, it would be difficult to maintain the lives and cultivation of hundreds of millions of gods. But they couldn't endlessly, greedily, and crazily plunder cultivation resources like before. That would only make the god realm more and more barren, and eventually weaken and destroy. Only by mining cultivation resources properly and in a planned manner could those cultivation resources have enough time to regenerate. If they could control and balance it reasonably, they could go on for a long time, and the resources would never dry up. The god realm would also not fall and be destroyed. Of course, there were many similar rules and systems that involved all aspects. There were more than tens of thousands of them. No matter how resourceful Ji Tianqing was, it was difficult for him to take care of all aspects. He could only propose the main ideas and framework, which were supplemented and perfected by the various domain chiefs, ancient clans, and forces and experts under their command. Even if there were any problems, those experts would report to him and propose various solutions for him to decide. In short, the Reincarnation Island was completely under his control. There were no worries. Thus, it was time for him to leave. Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, Yuchipa, Lan Kai, and the others had already rushed to the Netherworld Divine Palace to meet him. During this time, he had thought carefully and decided on his next destination. The Reincarnation Island was located in the middle of the God realm. Northeast, across the endless sky sea, he would reach the Qianquan continent. Southeast, across the vast sky sea, he would reach the chaotic continent. Southwest of the Reincarnation Island, across the stormy seas, he would reach the firmament continent. Ji Tianqing believed that the rulers and people of these 3 continents must have heard the news and knew that he had conquered the boundless heaven continent and the Reincarnation Island. At this moment, the rulers of the three continents must be anxious and alert. They must be deploying troops and setting up defenses. As for the billions of people, most of them were looking forward to his arrival as soon as possible. Ji Tianqing also planned to end the battle quickly and conquer these three continents as soon as possible to control the entire God realm. After all, the 5 God emperors could not leave and return to the God realm to deal with him. But the longer he delayed, the more variables there would be. Thus, he had already planned his future course of action in his mind. First, he would conquer the firmament continent to the southwest of the reincarnation island, then conquer the chaotic continent to the southeast, and finally attack the Qiankuan continent to the northeast. This route just happened to circle around the God realm, so it would not waste time. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing held a meeting in the Netherworld Divine Palace early in the morning. He gathered the chiefs of the 5 ancient clans, the commander and deputy commander of the Imperial Guards, the city guard governor of Yuda City, and more than 20 god generals, chiefs, and sect masters. Together with the 18 region masters, these people were Ji Tianqing's subordinates, the highest authority of the reincarnation island. Unfortunately, the 18 region masters were scattered and needed 10 days to reach Yudu, so Ji Tianqing did not gather them. Chapter 4263. After the meeting began, Ji Tianqing announced to the experts that he was leaving Reincarnation Island. Everyone was mentally prepared for this and knew that Kenshin couldn't stay on Reincarnation Island forever. Once the situation on Reincarnation Island was stabilized, Kenshin would definitely head to other continents and continue to save the people until he ruled the entire God realm. But this day had arrived. Everyone felt that it was earlier than expected, and they had mixed feelings about it. When Ji Tianqing was overseeing Yuda City, everyone felt a lot of pressure. They were careful with their words and actions, afraid that they would overstep their boundaries. Now that Ji Tianqing was leaving Reincarnation Island, they naturally felt relieved. But they definitely weren't happy, and they couldn't send Ji Tianqing off. In fact, the experts were still a little reluctant. They hoped that Kenshin could stay for a while longer. That way, they would have more confidence and peace of mind when carrying out various new policies and missions. At the same time, they would have more opportunities to perform and win Kenshin's favor. Everyone knew that the Sword God was fair in his rewards and punishments. He was never stingy and could be said to be extremely generous. If they could win Kenshin's favor and obtain some divine abilities and secret techniques, or receive guidance from Kenshin, it would be a great opportunity. Every divine king had the ambition to work hard and become a peak divine king. But their talents weren't outstanding enough. If they couldn't receive guidance from an expert like Kenshin, they wouldn't be able to reach the top in this lifetime. In short, everyone listened to Ji Tianqing's orders and instructions with mixed feelings. Ji Tianqing said to the experts. From now on, the various affairs of Reincarnation Island would be managed and handled by them. Everyone had to carry out their duties. They couldn't shirk their responsibilities and couldn't form cliques. Many God King experts naturally obeyed respectfully. With the heavenly Tao oath binding them, they didn't dare to disobey. In addition, if they had any matters that they couldn't decide or handle, they could report to the 5 ancient clans for them to discuss and decide. If the Pine Crane clan, Hidden Dragon clan, and the other clans couldn't make up their minds, they could contact him and let him handle it. Such a decision caused the pressure on the numerous experts to lessen, and they heaved a sigh of relief in secret. At the very least, this proved that Kenshin wasn't just going to leave Reincarnation Island to their own devices after conquering it. He would still pay attention to the situation on the Reincarnation Island. If there were any problems, he would find a way to solve them. Instead of handing the authority over to the experts present, he would hold them accountable when problems arose. 2 hours later, the meeting ended. Ji Tianqing prepared to leave Yudu, and numerous strong practitioners of the Divine King realm walked out of the meeting hall to send him off in the plaza outside the hall. At this moment, over a dozen god kings gathered the courage to report to Ji Tianqing after a brief moment of hesitation. They were willing to leave Samsara Island with Kenshin and conquer the other 3 continents. Although their strength wasn't considered top-notch, they were willing to contribute to Kenshin's hegemony in unifying the god realm. Whether it was serving as the Kenshin's entourage, assassins, or scouts to assassinate targets, or to gather information, they were all capable of it. At the very least, they could charge and break through enemy lines, risking their lives to kill the enemy. Instantly, everyone's gazes gathered on the dozen god kings. Their expressions and gazes were somewhat complicated. They envied the god kings' quick-wittedness, but they also sympathized with them for taking greater risks in order to obtain more benefits and glory. In short, the god kings who could make such a decision had made a great decision after careful consideration. After all, those divine king experts were the overlords of the Reincarnation Island. They were important officials under the Sword God and held great power in their hands. However, the situation on the Reincarnation Island had already been decided. Their power and status were far inferior to the 5 ancient clans, the commanders of the Imperial Guards, and the 18 domain lords. They wanted to climb to a higher position and obtain greater strength and power. There wasn't much hope for them to stay on the Reincarnation Island, so they could only follow Kenshin into battle. However, if Kenshin wanted to conquer the other 3 continents, he would have to experience even more slaughter and bloody battles. These god kings would have to risk their lives. It wasn't easy for them to earn merits and survive. Simply put, these god kings were like Nangong Ao, Wuxia Pa, Zhan Wudi, and Lan Kai. For various reasons, they wanted to follow Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't reject them. After carefully examining each god king's strength and realm and understanding their personalities and specialties, he made a selection. A total of 16 god kings wanted to follow him, and Ji Tianqing chose 10 of them. The 10 god kings who were chosen were naturally filled with joy and pride, as if they had received a great honor. After all, this was in front of so many god kings. Kenshin choosing them was an acknowledgement of them. As for the 6 god kings who weren't chosen, they were naturally filled with disappointment, like frost-beaten eggplants. They could only stay on the Reincarnation Island and find other ways to increase their strength and use their merits to obtain greater power and status. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianqing led his 10 followers onto the god-slaying battleship. Under the respectful escort of the god kings, they left Yuta City. Watching the god-slaying battleship disappear into the horizon, the god kings stood there for a long time before leaving. The white dragon was still steering the god-slaying battleship. It soared through the sky, heading straight for the firmament continent in the southwest. Within the battleship, Ji Tianqing's 15 followers were all in their own rooms, cultivating in secret chambers. In order to make it easier for them to complete missions in the future, Ji Tianqing taught the 10 new followers 3 kinds of concealment and assassination divine abilities. The requirements were also very simple. They needed to comprehend and master them within a month. The strength, talent, and comprehension of the 10 followers were similar to Nangong Ao, Wuxia Pa, and Zhan Wudi. Back then, Nangong Ao, Nangong Nihuang, and the rest only took 20 days to master them. Ji Tianqing believed that these 10 followers could master them within a month as well. The 10 followers were naturally overwhelmed by the divine abilities and secret techniques that Ji Tianqing gave them. They were overjoyed. When they heard that Kenshin required them to master them within a month so that they could use them when they went to the firmament continent, they all felt pressured. Luckily, when Ji Tianqing taught them the divine abilities and secret techniques, he also gave them the relevant cultivation experience and tips. This would allow the 10 followers to comprehend the divine abilities and secret techniques faster and master them faster. Just like that, the god-slaying battleship regained its peace. The 10 followers raced against time and focused on cultivating the divine abilities. Ji Tianqing also entered the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. He returned to the distorted spacetime and continued to cultivate in seclusion. Now, his strength had already reached 50 times that of a peak god king. However, he was still improving steadily every day. When he cultivated the heaven punishment divine skill, he constantly perfected the skill and deduced the next level of the skill. For this, he entered Kenshin's tomb again. He went to the wasteland to observe the heaven punishment sword formation and went to the divine book pavilion to read the countless books that he had collected in his previous life. It was worth mentioning that Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Ji Wuhan, and the rest had been cultivating in seclusion under the bloody flame sacred tree. Their strength had also increased tremendously. Chapter 42-64. Not long ago, Yun Yao broke through the 7th level of the Divine King realm and became an upper-level Divine King. Soon after, Ji Ku also broke through to the 7th level of the Divine King realm and became an upper-level Divine King. In this way, Ji Tianqing's family and friends became even more powerful. In addition to Bai Feng, who was at the 8th level of the Divine King realm, and Yang and Chao Qingyu, who had already broken through to the 7th level of the Divine King realm, there were already 5 upper-level Divine Kings among Ji Tianqing's trusted aides. Even Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, Lin Shui, and Zhen Hong had different levels of strength and realm improvement. Knowing that Ji Tianqing was rushing to the Firmament Continent and would start his operation in a month to conquer the Firmament Continent as soon as possible, everyone volunteered to fight. They had been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for too long and wanted to participate in the battle to train themselves and consolidate their realm. Ji Tianqing agreed and told everyone to cultivate in peace. When the time was right, he would let them fight. At the same time, the news of Kenshin killing Commander Styx, conquering Yudu, and successfully controlling Reincarnation Island had already spread throughout the god world. The rulers and commoners of the boundless heaven continent were overjoyed and they heard the news and cheered for Kenshin. After all, the rulers and commoners of this continent were all Kenshin's people and supported Kenshin from the bottom of their hearts. However, the rulers and commoners of the Firmament Continent, Qinkuan Continent, and Chaos Continent had different reactions. For nearly half a year, the rulers of these 3 continents kept hearing about Kenshin. They all knew that Kenshin wanted to conquer the 5 continents one by one and unify the entire god world. The boundless heaven continent was conquered by Kenshin first, followed by Reincarnation Island. Then, it would be one of the 3 continents. No one knew which continent Kenshin's next target would be after conquering Reincarnation Island. Therefore, the rulers of the 3 continents were worried and anxious, like ants on a hot pan. They knew that Kenshin's strength was very close to that of the God Emperor. With their strength, cultivation base, and divine abilities, even if they had 100,000 soldiers under their command, it would still be difficult for them to resist the Kenshin's invasion. Therefore, the first reaction of these people in power was to inform their God Emperor and ask for reinforcements. The true bodies of the 3 God Emperors who ruled the 3 continents had to remain in outer space to continue studying the mystery of the Grey Fog. They couldn't leave rashly, or else they would suffer great losses. They could only send out their avatars and rush back to the divine world as fast as they could. Of course, those with avatars could do so. For example, the Prajna God Emperor, who controlled the primal chaos continent, and the 9 young God Emperor, who controlled the heaven and earth continent, had already sent incarnations back to the God realm. For example, the ruler of the Firmament Continent, the God Emperor Dao Xingyun, was helpless. His avatar had already been killed by Ji Tianqing in outer space's heavenly policy starfield. Therefore, the rulers of the Firmament Continent who stayed behind, Dao Xingyun's trusted aides, couldn't do anything no matter how anxious they were. Dao Xingyun couldn't return to the divine world with his true body to resist Ji Tianqing's invasion. It was impossible for him to refine a new avatar in just 1 or 2 years. Dao Xingyun couldn't help his trusted generals and commanders with their requests for reinforcements. He could only come up with a few plans for his generals and instruct them to resist stubbornly and not surrender easily. Even if both sides knew that their generals and commanders were no match for the Kenshin. They would rather fight to the death and resist with their lives than let Kenshin win too easily. This concerned the reputation of the Star Cloud God Emperor. The rulers of the 3 continents were burning with anxiety. They hurriedly mobilized their troops, tightened their defenses, and set up layers of obstacles, traps, and ambushes. They were only waiting for the Kenshin to invade their territories, then they would fight back with all their might. However, the people of the 3 continents were full of anticipation day and night. They heard that the people of the Boundless Heaven continent and the Reincarnation Island had already regained their freedom. Not only did they no longer have to be slaves, but they also didn't have to work all day, mine resources, and worship the statue of the God Emperor on time. The people of the 3 continents were envious from the bottom of their hearts. They only hoped that they could regain their freedom as soon as possible. Even though the ordinary people didn't know what to do and didn't have the ability to help the Kenshin. However, they prayed silently in their hearts and prayed to the heavens for the Kenshin to be safe and successful. This was probably also an invisible force. In addition, there was a third group of people between the rulers of the 3 continents and the people of the 3 continents. These people were the top forces of the 3 continents, as well as the God Emperor powerhouses with independent identities. They weren't lackeys under the God Emperor's command. They hadn't been able to obtain greater authority or status, and they weren't as helpless as the common people. They had power, influence, and a certain level of status. Of course, there were also some ancient clans and top forces that weren't willing to swear allegiance to the God Emperor. They had been ostracized for thousands of years. Now that the God realm was in chaos and 2 continents had already been conquered by the Kenshin, they saw the dawn of hope. To them, the arrival of the Kenshin was a huge opportunity. If they could grasp this opportunity, they could very well change history and become important ministers under the Kenshin. They could also become the rulers of their respective continents. If they failed. From the looks of it, the Kenshin came with great momentum. They had the support of the people and were at the peak of their power. There was almost no possibility of defeat. To put it simply, many ancient clans, top forces, and God Emperor powerhouses on the 3 continents were secretly gathering, communicating, and discussing with the intention of swearing allegiance to the Kenshin. The rulers of the 3 continents quickly sensed that the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. When they discovered that some forces and experts were secretly colluding with the Kenshin, they were instantly enraged. The rulers didn't have the confidence to fight against the Kenshin. Now that there were forces in their territories that wanted to join the Kenshin, they had to suppress them. If they couldn't suppress them, they could only use thunderous means to destroy them in the bud. Thus, Ji Tianxing had just left Reincarnation Island and hadn't even reached any of the 3 continents when the 3 continents were in chaos. The situation on the Firmament continent was the most turbulent. After all, many forces and experts had heard that the Nebula God Emperor's avatar had fought with the Kenshin in the Heavenly Strategy Starfield. In the end, the avatar of the Nebula God Emperor was destroyed by the Kenshin. Now that the Kenshin wanted to invade the Firmament continent, the Nebula God Emperor couldn't help. This also boosted the confidence of the ancient clans and forces, making them even more fearless in collusion. In the midst of the chaos, the rulers of the Firmament continent gathered many God Emperor powerhouses and elite warriors to suppress the clans and forces. In just 1 month, 2 top forces were annihilated and disintegrated under the suppression of tens of thousands of troops. Such methods also intimidated the other clans and forces. They could only lay low and put on a respectful posture, not daring to show the slightest hint of rebellion. Chapter 4265. The chaotic situation in the Firmament land was soon calmed down. Seeing that all the clans, forces, and King God Realm Masters were very obedient, the rulers were finally relieved. But they were still not completely at ease, so they forced the clans and forces one by one to surrender and pledge loyalty to the Nebula God Emperor. Although they could not make an oath to the Heavenly Way like Kenshin and use the supervision of the Heavenly Way to restrain the clans and forces. But they could use more despicable means to threaten and control the clans and forces. Suddenly, the situation and atmosphere of the firmament land became extremely oppressive and heavy. It was as if a storm was coming. The ancient clans and forces were not pushovers, so they quickly came up with all kinds of ways to deal with it. Even if all kinds of methods were ineffective, they were still threatened by the rulers. But they still tried their best to stall for time, as long as they could. They only hoped that Kenshin would arrive at the firmament land as soon as possible, so that they could have a chance to get out of the trouble. In this way, the rulers of the firmament land were busy fighting with the clans and forces, so they were inevitably distracted. So when the god-slaying battleship arrived at the firmament land, it was not discovered by the rulers. The god-slaying battleship could enter the firmament land quietly mainly because the battleship hid its figure and aura. Even if this superb king-level divine battleship flew over a city, the king god realm masters guarding the city would not be able to detect its existence. The divine battleship entered a region in the north of the firmament land and was flying over the sea of clouds. White Dragon drove the divine battleship while waking Ji Tianqing up. "Master, we have entered the firmament land. Do you have any instructions?" He knew that his master already had a specific plan to conquer the firmament land. The main idea had been set long ago, but some details needed to be changed. So he did not ask about his master's plan, but directly asked for instructions. After a while, Ji Tianqing appeared in the meeting hall of the battleship and summoned Nangong Nihuang, Zhan Wudi, and the others. Including the 10 chosen followers on Samsara Island, a total of 15 divine kings gathered in the meeting hall, waiting for Ji Tianqing's instructions. In addition, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, and the others also left the distorted spacetime and came to the meeting hall to act with everyone. In order to help Ji Tianqing conquer the firmament continent as soon as possible, they also had to contribute. Just like this, over 20 divine king powerhouses gathered together, but they maintained silence with great tacit understanding. Ji Tianqing first asked the 10 followers from the Reincarnation Island about their cultivation results. The 10 followers were filled with pride and answered that they had already mastered the 3 secret techniques and could use them freely. Ji Tianqing was relieved and said to everyone, "For us, the firmament land is a strange place. It would be difficult to conquer the entire firmament land within a year. The first thing we need to do is to figure out the specific situation of the firmament land and the current situation. Even though we all know that the people of the firmament land will definitely welcome our arrival. But the people can't do anything for us except pray and look forward to it. The most beneficial and most likely to help us are the many antiquity clans and forces in the firmament land. As far as I know, there are 33 antiquity clans in the firmament land, all of which are powerful forces. In addition, there are more than 20 top forces, all of which are very famous sects, alliances, and families. Your next goal is to spread out to different regions of the firmament land and find out 2 things as soon as possible. First, who is the ruler of the firmament land now? How many divine kings and soldiers do you have? You must also get the detailed information of the nearly 100 territorial lords, their territorial lords' mansions, and their detailed information. Second, which clans and forces have long been loyal to the Nebula God Emperor and will not be used by us? Which clans and forces are not used by the Nebula God Emperor? Which clans and forces are neutral? Or are they possibly loyal to me? As long as we can figure out these 2 things, the next step will be very simple. First, we need to conquer and gather those forces that can be used by us and form the rebel alliance. Then, we will announce to the firmament land and officially launch the attack. After hearing Ji Tianqing's words, the people immediately had a detailed goal and plan in their minds. They no longer had any doubts and worries. At this time, a follower asked, "Master Kenshin, I have heard that the outer body incarnation of Dao Xingyun, the God Emperor who ruled the firmament land, once fought with you in the heavenly policy starfield and was destroyed by you. Is this true?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "That's right. Dao Xingyun only had one outer body incarnation and it was destroyed by me long ago. Although it has been a few years, it is impossible for Dao Xingyun to refine a second incarnation in such a short period of time. So, you can focus on carrying out the mission without worrying about Dao Xingyun's incarnation. Of course, when carrying out the mission, you must remember the principle of being bold but careful. With your strength and divine powers, as long as you are not surrounded by many god kings, you should be fine. Even if you are fighting against the region leaders, you may not lose. Among the 15 followers, the weakest one was at the 5th level of the Divine King realm. Most of them were at the upper level of the Divine King realm. The region leaders of the firmament land were basically at the same level of strength. Many of the followers had cultivated the divine powers that Ji Tianqing taught them. As long as they did not act rashly and only spied on the military and information, they would be safe. Yes, Master. The 15 followers bowed and said yes, indicating that they would complete the mission smoothly. Then, Ji Tianqing assigned them the specific targets of the mission. The targets of the 15 followers were to investigate more than 40 regions in the north of the firmament land. On average, each of them would be responsible for investigating 3 regions. Ji Tianqing gave them a deadline of 3 months. The time was not too long, but it was not too tight either. After the 15 followers received the order, they started to carry out the mission. Of course, the first 2 followers to leave the Deity Slayer battleship were going to investigate a few regions nearby. The other followers would continue to fly south on the Deity Slayer battleship and go deeper into the firmament land. They would only leave the battleship when the Deity Slayer battleship was closest to their targets. After all, the Deity Slayer battleship was much faster than them. After Ji Tianqing assigned the missions to the 15 followers, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others asked what their missions and targets were. Chapter 42-66. The realm of Azure Heaven was the center of the Azure Heaven land. That was the core of the entire continent, because the rulers of the entire continent lived in Tiandu. Tiandu sounded like the name of a city. In fact, it was a paradise, an alternate dimension with powerful defenses and excellent resources. The palace of the Nebula God Emperor and his abode were in Heaven Capital. Now that the Nebula God Emperor was not in the Firmament Continent, his right-hand men were left in the Firmament Continent to control the overall situation. They were definitely in the Divine Capital. Ji Tianqing gave the easier and safer missions to his followers. He would go to the most dangerous places to find out the most important secrets. The dozen or so followers were well aware of this, and they were grateful for it. They had to admit that Kenshin could conquer all the continents not only because of his strength but also because of his unique charisma. For example, the 10 God King experts that had just followed him. Just from this small detail, there was an additional sense of respect and gratitude towards Ji Tianqing. As time went by, they would follow Ji Tianqing for a long time. Like Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Bai Feng, they would become Ji Tianqing's most trusted subordinates. At that time, they would respect and admire Ji Tianqing from the bottom of their hearts. They would be closer to Ji Tianqing as friends. Day after day, the god-slaying battleship went deeper into the Azure Heaven land and crossed one region after another. Along the way, 1 or 2 followers would leave every 2 or 3 regions to carry out missions. Half a month later, the god-slaying battleship entered the center of the Azure Heaven land and was not far from the realm of Azure Heaven. At this time, all 15 followers left the battleship. At the same time, the first follower who left the battleship to carry out a mission found out the general situation of a region and reported it to Ji Tianqing. That region was at the northern edge of the Azure Heaven land and close to the boundless sky sea. Probably because it was too remote and Kenshin's first stop on the way to the Azure Heaven land from the Reincarnation Island, the ruler gave it up. The ruler of the region stayed in the domain chief's mansion and blocked it. No one was allowed to go in or out. Only messages from Heaven Capital could be sent to the domain chief's mansion. At the same time, the ruler gathered all the soldiers he could and hid in the domain chief's mansion. The ruler's attitude was that no matter how Kenshin invaded his territory, he just needed to hide in the domain chief's mansion. If Kenshin broke into the domain chief's mansion, he would wait and see what would happen. Anyway, no reinforcements would come to help him and the rulers of Heaven Capital would not come in person. He was a small ruler with only about 10,000 soldiers and only 2,000 of them. How could he resist Kenshin's army? The person in power had given up on him, and he had also given up on himself. In addition to this news, the follower also sent back another message. He had heard that the current ruler of the Firmament Continent was the famous godly King Tianyu and the 4 battle generals under his command. Celestial King was the cousin of the God Emperor, Dao Xinyan. He was also a peak divine king who broke through 800 years ago. He was cruel, vicious, and good at scheming. He was very strict with his subordinates and had great prestige and deterrence among the people. Celestial King's generals were all experts at the LV9 Divine King realm and ranked among the top 20 experts in the Azure Heaven land. Only the patriarchs and supreme elders of the ancient clans were qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as them. The generals had different personalities. Some were brave, some were smart, and some were good at hiding. But the one thing they had in common was that the 4 war commanders were all very talented in commanding troops. They had experienced countless battles and had rarely been defeated. In addition, there should be a large number of Divine King experts hiding in Heaven Capital, such as guardians and elders. The follower said that he only heard the general information and did not know the details. He asked Lord Kenshin to be careful. Ji Tianxing was deeply gratified and satisfied with this result. He sent a message to that follower, expressing his affirmation of the efficiency of his work. Even though he didn't say any words of praise, the follower was still filled with joy and excitement after receiving the message. After all, it was a great honor to be praised by Lord Kenshin. 3 days later, the god-slaying battleship entered the central part of the Azure Heaven land and came to the entrance of Heaven Capital. The entrance of Heaven Capital was located in the vast mountain range with a radius of 1 million miles. It was hidden in the vast sea of clouds. The 200,000 miles around the entrance had long been set up by experts to conceal the original appearance of the place. Even if it was a god-king expert, without someone from Tiandu leading the way, they would lose their way and fall into a trap. Therefore, the vast forests and mountains around Heaven Capital had always been deserted. The god-slaying battleship hovered in the sky above the vast mountain range. It was invisible and was not afraid of being discovered. White Dragon was controlling the god-slaying battleship in the cockpit. Ji Tianxing stood behind him and silently released his divine sense to explore the surrounding 100,000 miles. He was exploring the area shrouded in the sea of clouds with the Confusion Formation. The entrance of Heaven Capital was in the center of the Confusion Formation, the most hidden place. Even with Ji Tianxing's divine sense, he could not see the situation at the entrance in a short time. The god-slaying battleship hovered in this area for a dozen laps. It took 6 hours for Ji Tianxing to break the Confusion Formation and see the situation at the entrance of Heaven Capital. It was a cloud platform with a radius of 100 miles. There were 5,000 elite guards stationed on it. All of them were wearing armor and holding swords. They were on high alert. There were 20 Divine King experts leading the 5,000 guards. Among them, there were 2 high-level Divine Kings. It could be seen that Celestial King attached great importance to the safety of Heaven Capital. He did not hesitate to send a large number of troops to guard here. The formation at the entrance was also closed and would not be opened easily. No one could enter or leave. As a result, Ji Tianxing's dream of turning into dust and attaching himself to some expert to sneak into Tiandu was also destroyed. This Confusion Formation is actually a king-level divine formation. It seems to be the work of Dao Xinyan. It was set up 1,000 years ago. In the future, when the Rebel Alliance's army is established, even if they subdue nearly 100 regions, they will be blocked by the confusion formation and will not be able to enter heaven capital. Ji Tianqing seemed to be muttering to himself. He frowned and thought of a way to break the formation. White Dragon thought for a moment and asked, "Master, this confusion formation must be broken, but we can't touch it now. I'm afraid we will alert the enemy." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, "That's right. Master came to Heaven Capital this time to inquire about the situation in Heaven Capital. I want to know what precautions and plans Celestial King has. It will be easier to take action in the future and reduce the casualties of the soldiers. Before subduing 100 regions, Master will not rashly attack Heaven Capital." Chapter 4267. Although Ji Tianqing would not attack Tiandu in the short term, but he had to understand the situation of Tiandu in advance and think of a way to break the maze formation. Only then could he break the formation at any time when he entered Tiandu in the future. In the previous 6 hours, he only understood the structure of the maze formation, saw through all the concealment, and saw the real situation inside the formation. Next, the god-slaying warship circled around the maze formation a few times at a neither fast nor slow speed. Ji Tianqing used another 8 hours to carry out tens of thousands of deductions, calculations, and repeated verifications in his mind before he confirmed 2 ways to break the formation. One was a literary method, the other was a martial method. From the literal meaning, one could understand that the first method was a gentle method to break the formation. The advantage of this method was that the movement was very small, very covert, and would not arouse the vigilance of the guards at the Grotto Heaven entrance. But the disadvantage was that it needed a long time, estimated to be about a day, and it consumed a lot of mind and divine power. The second martial method was to use violence and force to break the maze formation. The disadvantage was that the movement was big, and would definitely arouse the attention of the guards at the entrance, and then lead to being besieged and blocked. But the advantage was that the speed was faster, and the method was simple and crude, estimated to only need 2 hours to break. Of course, the martial method sounded very reckless, but it was not attacking blindly. If it was other people, even if it was a peak divine king, wanting to forcefully break the maze formation was also impossible. Only Ji Tianqing, this formation path grandmaster, after analyzing the structure of the maze formation, could find the relatively weak and very crucial 2 nodes from the 200 million nodes of the formation. And only by attacking those 2 nodes of the formation could the formation be broken in the shortest time. After thinking of a way to break the formation, Ji Tianqing let Bai Long drive the warship and leave this area. Bai Long was somewhat eager to try, seemingly a little unwilling, and asked, "Master, haven't you already found the way to break the formation? Are we leaving like this? Don't you plan to sneak into Tiandu and see the situation and military strength inside?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "If I want to sneak into Tiandu, I need to spend 1 or 2 days to break the maze formation and get close to the entrance of the Grotto Heaven without alerting the guards. But the defensive formation at the entrance is closed, needless to say, it must be the supreme grade divine formation personally set up by Dao Xinyan. Under the eyes of 5,000 guards, I need to break that formation without anyone knowing, and enter Tiandu. The difficulty is too great, and the risk is too great. Now our whereabouts is still confidential, Celestial King does not know that we have come. If my whereabouts are exposed, I will immediately engage in a decisive battle with Empyrean God King and his elite soldiers." Bai Long was suddenly at a loss for words. He smiled awkwardly and said, "That's impossible, and there's no need to take such a big risk just to get information." "Well, where are we going next?" Ji Tianqing said indifferently, "We can't enter Tiandu at the moment, so we can only start from the surrounding regions to get more information. Especially those region leaders, and the leaders of the ancient clans and top forces, they must know something about Tiandu." White Dragon suddenly understood and immediately guessed that his master was going to ask those region leaders and experts for information. If possible, his master would most likely subdue those experts and secretly take them under his command. When the news that Kenshin had arrived in the firmament land spread, his master would have gathered many forces and experts under his command. Just thinking about it, White Dragon felt that this plan was very reliable and gave him a sense of accomplishment. He could also imagine the expressions of Celestial King and the 4 generals when they learned the news and the truth. After leaving the vast mountains, the first target of the god-slaying battleship was the domain leader's mansion in the firmament land. Although Tiandu was in the center of the firmament land and was the power core of the whole firmament land. But there was still a domain leader and the domain leader's mansion in the firmament land. The domain leader of the firmament land was like the imperial city governor of the secular imperial city, with a very special status. Although he was only a domain leader in name, he was the noblest and most powerful one among all the domain leaders. At the same time, this domain leader was also one of the disciples of the Star God Emperor and a frequent visitor to Tiandu. Among the 100 domain leaders, he was the one who was closest to the Celestial King and the 4 generals and knew the situation of Tiandu the best. Ji Tianqing thought that if he could find the domain leader of the firmament land, he must subdue him with the oath of the heavenly way. Not only could he learn about the situation in Heaven Capital from the ruler of Firmament Domain, but he could also use the ruler of Firmament as a spy to monitor the movements of Empyrean God King and the 4 great commanders. However, the dream was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. One day later, when Ji Tianqing tried his best to sneak into the domain leader's mansion, he found nothing. The domain leader's mansion was also in a resource-rich alternate space. It was heavily guarded and the entrance was closed. Ji Tianqing finally cracked the formation at the entrance and sneaked into the domain leader's mansion without alerting anyone. However, he didn't find the domain leader after 2 rounds of searching. There were only 2,000 elite guards and thousands of family members, servants, and handymen in the domain leader's mansion. Among them, the strongest and most powerful ones were the 2 guard commanders and the wife of the domain master of Firmament Realm. Not to mention the domain leader, even the deputy domain leader was missing. Ji Tianqing was a little disappointed. He didn't need to investigate to know that the domain leader and the deputy domain leader were most likely hiding in Tiandu with a large number of elite soldiers. Or, they were on a mission ordered by the Celestial King. If it was the latter, he could find another chance to capture the domain leader. If it was the former, he had to give up the plan temporarily. Later, Ji Tianqing secretly captured a guard captain in the domain leader's mansion. There was a reason why he chose this person as his target. The guard captain had been patrolling for a month and was very tired. He and another guard captain took turns to be on duty. After the handover, he returned to his residence and prepared to recuperate for a period of time. In this way, the guard captain knew what had happened in the past month and disappeared for a month without being noticed. Ji Tianqing didn't even interrogate him after he captured him. He directly killed him, refined his godhead, and plundered his divine soul memory. Through his divine soul memory, he knew the whereabouts of the domain leader and the deputy domain leader. It turned out that the Celestial King had summoned all the domain leaders and elite soldiers to Tiandu more than 20 days ago. The domain leader was the first to be summoned because of his special identity. The top. Chapter 4268. The guard captain's status was low, so he didn't know much. Especially the secret information that Ji Tianqing wanted to know. For example, which territory lords had the Celestial King summoned? What was the situation in Heaven Capital? How many soldiers and god kings were there? The guard captain knew nothing about this. Although Ji Tianqing felt a little regretful, he didn't care since he got the information he wanted the most. Since he couldn't do anything in the realm of Green Heaven, he could only choose to leave and go to other territories to find opportunities. The god-slaying battleship came and left quietly, rushing to the next territory. After leaving the realm of Green Heaven, Ji Tianqing assigned tasks to everyone. Yin Yao and Ji Wuhan worked together to investigate the situation in several territories. Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang worked together to investigate the other 4 territories. Chao Qingyu and Lan worked together to investigate a territory. Yan Ku and Bai Feng were stronger, so they acted alone and were in charge of investigating the 3 regions. Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, Blood Illusion God King, Gold Left Emissary, and Blood Dragon Right Emissary were weaker. They were all lower God Kings, but they insisted on participating. Therefore, Ji Tianqing let the 5 of them work together to investigate a few territories. They could take care of each other. As for Ji Tianqing, he would take White Dragon to the south of the realm of Green Heaven to investigate more territories. If there were any unexpected situations, he would rush there as fast as he could. As a result, all of Ji Tianqing's followers, relatives, and friends went to carry out their missions. They would investigate more than 70 territories. They believed that they would be able to collect comprehensive information. As for the remaining 20 territories, Ji Tianqing would investigate some of them. Even if there were some territories that they didn't have time to investigate, it didn't matter. If they could figure out the situation in more than 70 territories, they could basically represent the entire realm of Green Heaven. 8 days later, the god-slaying battleship arrived at the south of the realm of Green Heaven. At this time, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Lin Shui, and the others left the battleship one after another and headed to the designated area to gather information. Only Ji Tianqing and White Dragon were left in the battleship. They arrived at a new area and began to gather information. In the past few days, the followers who had been inquiring about the situation in the northern part of the firmament continent had also sent messages to Ji Tianqing, reporting the situation in various regions. What was interesting was that a portion of the regions at the edge of the continent did not lead their elite soldiers to gather at Tiandu. They chose to stay behind and guard the domain chief's manor. They closed the entrance of the domain chief's manor and resigned themselves to fate. And the further south they went, the more domain lords brought their elites and rushed to Tiandu to gather. All in all, it was the order of the Celestial King that there were more domain lords heading towards Tiandu. Those who stayed behind in the domain chief's manor were usually domain lords who were not favored and did not receive much resources or training. Or they were discontented and intended to be loyal to the Kenshin. In short, the firmament continent under the rule of the Celestial King was not a monolith. Hundreds of domain lords were not united and could not reach a consensus. This was good news for Ji Tianqing. It would be easier for him to unify the entire firmament continent in the future. Time passed day after day. Ji Tianqing spent 2 days to gather information about a region. He knew that the domain lord of this region had led his elite soldiers to Tiandu. He decisively went to the next region. 2 days later, he sneaked into the domain chief's manor of this region and found the domain lord. Interestingly, the domain lord had closed the domain chief's manor. There were only thousands of family members, servants, handymen, and more than 1,000 guards accompanying him. The deputy domain lord had led more than 1,000 elite soldiers to gather at Tiandu. Ji Tianqing used some new means and found out that the domain lord and the deputy domain lord had disagreements. They had quarreled many times before and finally this situation had occurred. The domain lord was dissatisfied with the Celestial King, while the deputy domain lord was the Celestial King's loyal dog. It was said that the Celestial King appreciated and valued the deputy domain lord greatly when he learned that they had parted ways. He was very disappointed and angry with the domain lord. The Celestial King would soon order to remove the domain lord from his position and take him to Tiandu for trial. At that time, the deputy domain lord would take over the domain lord's position. Knowing this, Ji Tianqing did not alert the domain lord. Instead, he quietly sneaked into the secret room where the domain lord meditated. He sealed the secret room with a formation to ensure that no one could detect anything unusual. Then he appeared in front of the domain lord and they talked alone. When the domain lord saw him, he was shocked and subconsciously wanted to fight back and call for help. However, Ji Tianqing only needed to say one sentence to calm the domain lord down. After carefully sizing up Ji Tianqing, the region master compared him to his memories and confirmed Ji Tianqing's identity. He was immediately surprised and overjoyed, and he was so excited that he spoke incoherently. Ji Tianqing sat down calmly and looked at the domain lord. He bowed respectfully and said a lot of words of admiration and flattery. When the domain lord calmed down, Ji Tianqing told him the purpose of his visit and got to the point. My whereabouts are confidential. You are the first person to see me in the firmament land. So, you only have two choices. You can either be loyal to me or disappear. The domain lord nodded quickly and felt a little proud. He said excitedly, Master Kenshin, please rest assured. I have been looking forward to your arrival. For this reason, I did not hesitate to fall out with the deputy domain lord and offend the celestial king. I have been waiting for this day. I will swear allegiance to you now and keep this secret. I will never leak the news. The domain lord patted his chest and promised that he would keep this secret. He had already regarded himself as Kenshin's subordinate. In the face of such a sensible domain lord, Ji Tianqing was relieved. He took out a jade slip and threw it in front of the domain lord. The domain lord did not ask anything. He took the jade slip and solemnly read the heavenly oath. Obviously, before Ji Tianqing arrived in the firmament land, the domain lord had heard a lot about Kenshin and already knew the rules of Kenshin. No matter how terrible the heavenly oath made by Kenshin was, if he wanted to surrender and be loyal to Kenshin, he had to read it. Since the experts of the boundless heaven continent and the Samsara island had all read the heavenly oath, what was there to be afraid of? With this mentality, the domain lord was fearless. It only took him a few minutes to finish reading the heavenly oath. Then, his whole body lit up with colorful divine light. A wisp of Taoist rhyme appeared on top of his head. Thunder roared and flashed in the sky above the domain lord's mansion. Feeling the mighty heavenly might, the domain lord was frightened. At the same time, he admired and respected Kenshin even more. At the same time, he could not help but imagine that since he was the first person to swear allegiance to Kenshin in the firmament land, he must seize the opportunity and perform well. He was one step ahead of everyone. As long as there were no accidents, he would definitely become Kenshin's most trusted and valued right-hand man in the future. Chapter 4269. In fact, Ji Tianqing only had a basic understanding of the first territorial master he pledged his loyalty to and did not continue. Although the territorial master was loyal, he was only at the LV6 Divine King realm. He was destined to not have many achievements. In the future, when Ji Tianqing unified the entire firmament land, it would be difficult for the territorial master to take on a big responsibility, let alone govern the land on behalf of him. Of course, the territorial master was not strong enough. More importantly, as the territorial master, he could not restrain the deputy territorial master and let him take away more than 1,000 elite soldiers. This showed that the territorial master's courage and means were still somewhat lacking. Seeing that Ji Tianqing was silent, the territorial master hesitated for a moment and decided to take the initiative to find an opportunity to perform and make a contribution. He plucked up his courage and asked, Master Kenshin, if you have any orders, I will do as you say. I am willing to share your burdens, even if it means sacrificing my life. Obviously, the territorial master wanted Ji Tianqing to arrange some tasks for him. Although he was the first to surrender, if he carried out a task, it would be dangerous. But he knew that wealth came from danger. Only by doing this could he show Kenshin his determination and loyalty. However, he neglected the most important point. At present, he only had more than 1,000 guards under his command, and they were not elite troops. Most of them were middle divine emperors and lower divine emperors. Even if he asked the territorial master to mobilize the troops of the empires, few emperors would obey his orders. In other words, it was difficult for him to carry out any important tasks with his troops. Ji Tianqing did not say it clearly. He just waved his hand and said, "I am investigating and grasping the situation of the firmament land. It is not suitable for me to do anything for the time being. Just tell me what you know." The territorial master was a little disappointed when he heard this, but he was secretly relieved. Although he could not make a contribution, at least he could be of some use. It was a comfort, at least he did not have to risk his life. Thus, he told Ji Tianqing everything he knew about the situation in full detail. Before this, he did not make the necessary preparations. Therefore, when he reported the news to Ji Tianqing, he said whatever came to his mind. Ji Tianqing listened patiently, asking questions from time to time for the region master to answer. Just like that, the two of them talked in the secret room for 4 hours before ending. Ji Tianqing now had a better understanding of the situation in the firmament land. For example, the general situation of the dozens of domain masters, roughly which clans and forces were loyal to the celestial king, and which clans and forces were neutral. Previously, which forces had shown signs of resistance and had the intention to join the Kenshin. This information was very useful to Ji Tianqing. At the very least, he knew that at least 6 ancient clans and 4 peak powers had long since planned to pledge their loyalty to him. Ji Tianqing didn't stay any longer and was about to leave after the domain leader told him everything he knew. Before he left, he warned the region lord, "This matter must be kept a secret and must not be known to anyone else. I'll leave you 3 jade slips. If there is any emergency or important news, you can report directly to me. In addition, you can stay in the domain leader's mansion and wait for my orders." The region lord nodded quickly to show that he understood. He bowed respectfully and saw Ji Tianqing off. Of course, Ji Tianqing's departure was also very quiet. Other than the region lord, no one else knew. Then, Ji Tianqing went to other regions to continue to inquire about the news. If he met any region lord who was still in the domain leader's mansion, he would take him down without hesitation. During this period, more than a dozen followers, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and others sent him messages one after another, reporting the situation of each region. The situation was similar in both the north and the south of the firmament land. Most of the region lords were loyal to the celestial king and the nebula god emperor. They were ordered to bring their elites to heaven capital. Only a few region lords stayed in the domain leader's mansion. They were not willing to follow the orders of the celestial king, nor did they dare to openly pledge allegiance to the Kenshin. Judging from the current situation, the celestial king's strategy was the same as that of the imperial tutor of the boundless heaven continent and commander Mingi of the reincarnation island. Without the protection of the god emperor, they could only gather all the region lords, clans, and forces and hide in one place to resist the invasion of the Kenshin. They didn't dare to take the initiative to attack, nor did they dare to disperse their forces to avoid being defeated by the Kenshin one by one. There was nothing new about this method. It could even be regarded as a helpless move. However, this was the best method that the rulers of each continent could come up with. At the same time, this method could indeed delay time and slow down the speed of Ji Tianqing's domination of the entire continent. At least, he didn't dare to launch a general attack before the rebel alliance was established. Unknowingly, another 10 days had passed. Ji Tianqing investigated 3 more regions. The 3 region lords had rushed to heaven capital with their elites. The domain leader's mansion was empty. However, Ji Tianqing didn't attack the domain leader's mansion because it was meaningless. According to the feedback and intelligence from his followers, relatives, and friends, most of the region lords were experts of the top forces and gathered in heaven capital. Even if there were a few region lords who stayed in the domain leader's mansion and the leaders of the top forces, they either remained neutral and watched coldly from the sidelines, or their forces were slightly weaker. Ji Tianqing's plan to unify the firmament continent was delayed again and again. There was no breakthrough in a short period of time. At this time, Yun Yao sent him a piece of good news. A good news that made Ji Tianqing excited and full of expectations. In the south-central part of the firmament continent, Yun Yao accidentally heard a piece of news when she was investigating the fourth region. The top force in this region, the Fantasy Sun sect, had close contact with several ancient clans and top forces. The six forces were dissatisfied with the Celestial King and intended to unite and join the Kenshin. Unfortunately, 2 months ago, the Celestial King sent a large number of experts and elite troops to annihilate one of the forces and killed tens of thousands of alliance members. Such forceful and vicious methods forced the other 5 powers to have no choice but to vanish without a trace, and they didn't dare reveal any intention to rely on the Sword God any longer. Even so, the Celestial King didn't intend to let them go. He used all kinds of despicable and shameless methods to force the 5 forces to surrender and pledge allegiance. Now, the 5 forces could only struggle and try all kinds of ways to stall for time. They refused to bow their heads and admit defeat, nor could they unite to openly rebel. They could only be suppressed by the Celestial King in anger and helplessness, and their forces were constantly weakened. When Yun Yao sent the news to Ji Tianqing, she quickly rushed to the Fantasy Sun sect. She wanted to meet the master of the Fantasy Sun sect and negotiate with them in person. Even if Ji Tianqing couldn't be there for the time being, she wanted to replace Ji Tianqing and conquer the Fantasy Sun sect and the other 4 forces in the name of the Kenshin. Chapter 4270. As husband and wife for 200 years, Ji Tianqing knew Yun Yao's nature very well. She was never a reckless and impulsive person. She was even more benevolent, loving, and intelligent. But even so, Ji Tianqing was still worried and anxious when he heard that she was going to take her son to Illusory Sun sect to negotiate with the upper echelons of Illusory Sun sect. He immediately sent a message to Yun Yao, telling her not to act rashly. He would meet up with them as soon as possible. When the time came, he would appear and subdue Illusory Sun sect. If Yun Yao and Ji Wuhan went to Illusory Sun sect and encountered an accident, the consequences would be too serious. However, Yun Yao replied to Ji Tianqing, saying that those forces were in deep water and had been forced into a corner by the Celestial King. The situation was very urgent. If she delayed for one more day, those forces might not be able to withstand the pressure of the Celestial King and surrender to the Celestial King. Not to mention that she had enough strength and confidence to protect Wuhan and herself. Just the determination of those 5 forces showed clearly that they wanted to rely on the Kenshin. As long as she stated her identity and purpose, she believed that those 5 forces would not make things difficult for her. Moreover, even if something unexpected happened, she had her own unique skills and supreme-grade divine artifacts, which were enough to protect herself. Ji Tianqing was worried about his wife's decision, but he still respected and acquiesced. At the same time, he had the white dragon rush over as fast as possible. Late at night the next day, Yun Yao spent a day, went through many twists and turns, and spent a lot of effort to pass through many obstacles and encirclements, and sneak into the headquarters of Illusory Sun sect. This sect had 10,000 years of history, and its strength and foundation could be considered top-notch. It was located in a blessed land. For almost half a month, the experts and forces under the Celestial King had surrounded this blessed land and stared at Illusory Sun sect. Even a fly could not fly out of the blessed land, let alone the people of Illusory Sun sect. In addition, the Celestial King was still pressuring Illusory Sun sect to surrender. Illusory Sun sect's subordinate forces and countless properties had been destroyed and confiscated by Celestial King. The current Illusory Sun sect was no longer as powerful as it was in the past. All that was left was this blessed land and 10,000 disciples. Even though the Illusory Sun sect master and the elders were determined, they gritted their teeth and refused to surrender to the Celestial King. However, Some of the elders, deacons, and disciples in the sect were unable to withstand such enormous pressure. They had been in a state of panic, unable to eat or sleep in peace. Recently, the pressure on the illusory sun sect had reached its peak. Different voices had already appeared within the sect. Almost half of the disciples, deacons, and elders were shaken and had the thought of surrendering. The illusory sun sect master felt helpless. He did not want to yield to the celestial king, but he also did not want to see the sect split up and his disciples lose their lives. Faced with such a difficult choice, he had been hesitating, struggling, and waiting. At this time, 2 messengers sent by the celestial king entered illusory sun-blessed land under the escort of 10 guards. In the past month, this was already the 5th batch of messengers sent by the celestial king. When the guards at the gate reported this news to the illusory sun sect master, the illusory sun sect master immediately frowned. Deep worry flashed through his eyes. This was because he knew that the celestial king's patience had reached its limit. The 2 messengers that had arrived tonight were most likely here to deliver an ultimatum. If he could not make a decision tonight, then the illusory sun sect would completely lose their chance. Within 2 days at the latest, the army sent by the celestial king would arrive and attack the illusory sun sect. Simply put, the time to decide the fate of the illusory sun sect had arrived. No matter how unwilling the illusory sun sect master was, he had no choice but to order the guards to lead the messengers into the main hall and serve them tea. At the same time, he ordered the guards to inform the elders to gather in the main hall. After a short few minutes, the 9 elders of the illusory sun sect had gathered in the main hall. Afterwards, the illusory sun sect master also entered the main hall, wearing a magnificent robe and a divine crown on his head. Even though the relationship between the 2 sides had become very stiff and hostile, the 2 messengers were also very arrogant and lofty. But after meeting, the illusory sun sect master and the 9 elders still had to bow to the 2 messengers and exchange some false pleasantries. The 2 messengers were not even willing to sit down and had an impatient look on their faces. After exchanging pleasantries, they directly stated their intentions. Indeed, they were here to deliver an ultimatum on behalf of the celestial king. Illusory sun sect master, you have already thought of all kinds of methods and excuses to delay for more than a month. We are all smart people, so we can't be bothered to beat around the bush with you. In any case, we have already talked about everything that needs to be said. No matter how benevolent and magnanimous the celestial king is, there is a limit to his patience. We cannot allow you to repeatedly challenge his bottom line. Tonight, we 2 messengers have come here on behalf of the celestial king. We will not waste words with you. We only want a word from the illusory sun sect. Will you surrender or not? He. I advise you to think carefully before answering. Don't make a mistake. The entire firmament continent is the territory of His Majesty the God Emperor. The celestial king is ruling this continent on behalf of His Majesty the God Emperor. All the territories and people should submit to him. Therefore, it is natural for the illusory sun sect to be loyal to the celestial king. If the illusory sun sect dares to resist, you should know the result. After all, General Nan Fong has already left with 10,000 soldiers. He is not far from here. The 2 messengers directly threatened the illusory sun sect master, leaving no room for delay. There was no other way. In this month, the deadlock had been delayed too many times. The celestial king was not willing to wait any longer. The illusory sun sect master and the 9 elders also knew that they had already delayed to the limit. They could not delay any longer. Tonight, they had to make a decision and give a clear answer. Otherwise, the 2 messengers would not leave the matter at that. The celestial king would also not let the illusory sun sect go. Seeing the illusory sun sect master and the elders frowning, they remained silent. The atmosphere in the hall was heavy and oppressive. The two messengers had mocking smiles on their faces as they silently waited for the illusory Sun Sect Master to give an answer. But at this moment, a soft sound of someone falling to the ground suddenly woke everyone up. Bang! Everyone subconsciously turned their heads and looked at the corner of the hall's door. They saw that beside the closed door, in a dark corner, there were originally 5 guards who had followed the two messengers here. And at this moment, those 5 High Divine Lord Realm guards had all lost their vitality, collapsing in a pool of blood. Beside the 5 corpses stood a beautiful woman in a white dress and an extremely handsome youth with a cold temperament. Before the crowd could see their faces clearly, they did not have time to think about who they were or why they had appeared here. They teleported to the other side of the door and instantly killed the other 5 guards with lightning speed. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.